Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In a recent Space News, Thunderblog contributor Jimmy Micketts offered a thought-provoking analysis of an audible phenomenon that has puzzled scientists and laypersons alike for decades: the mysterious so-called hum. As we've described in many episodes, anecdotal accounts dating back centuries describe puzzling sounds associated with electromagnetic phenomena, such as the Northern Lights. But what about the ability of sound to produce in matter phenomena that may be fundamentally electrical? So-called sonoluminescence, or the emission of light flashes when sound waves passing through liquid burst bubbles of gas, is a source of both puzzlement and growing scientific interest. An article in the journal Nature entitled "Collapsing Bubbles Have Hot Plasma Core" describes detailed measurements of the phenomenon. It states, "They call it a star in a jar. When sound waves crush bubbles of gas in a liquid, energy is released in a dramatic burst of heat and light. Now the first detailed measurements of the phenomenon have shown that the molecules in the gas really do create a pinpoint of plasma, the energetic soup of ions and electrons found in every star." The research raises hopes that the effect, called sonoluminescence, might one day be used as an almost limitless source of energy. In this episode, Jimmy Micketts explores the possible importance of sonoluminescence in our electric universe.
What if sound didn't only flow through matter but could produce unexpected phenomena like light? Research in sound has revealed the capacity of sound to influence matter in a way that produces light. The phenomenon of sonoluminescence is one example of this relationship. Sonoluminescence occurs when high-frequency sound vibrates tiny gas bubbles to reach star-like temperatures and emit flashes of light. The mechanism of sonoluminescence is not fully understood, but its occurrence is well documented. As SL researchers probe deeper into the phenomenon, they have found that current fluid dynamics equations do not explain why it happens. Sonoluminescence is a natural phenomenon as well, and marine biologists observe some species of shrimp using it as an attack against other creatures. It is the bridge between sound and light and can offer a deeper understanding of nature's laws. In a study at UCLA called Sonoluminescence: How Bubbles Turn Sound into Light, scientists S.J. Putterman and K.R. Wenninger explore the mathematics and phenomenology of sonoluminescence. It is known that this phenomenon is caused by the rapid expansion and contraction of a bubble. Explore the math because the broadband UV light emitted appears at a frequency, though not continuously. Think of a strobe light as an analogy where flashes of light last only picoseconds, which is a trillionth of a second. According to Professor Putterman, the phenomenon of sonoluminescence can heat bubbles up to tens of thousands of degrees. The surface of these bubbles burn at 20,000 Kelvin, which is 35,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and they look like little stars. Quote, "Sonoluminescence, the transduction of sound into light, is a phenomenon that pushes fluid dynamics beyond its limit. Sonoluminescence can be repeatedly produced in a controlled laboratory environment. Some of the key requirements are degassed water, a noble gas mixture bubble, and a source of high-frequency sound. Typically, the sound is produced by a piezoelectric element. The scale of the experiment is typically small. Only about a cupful of water is necessary, and the size of the bubble is typically only microns in size. It should be obvious why the phenomenon has gotten the nickname of star in a jar. The small cavitating bubble takes on the appearance of a small star. Conventional fluid dynamic equations do not account for sonoluminescence entirely. Specifically, some research have applied Raleigh's equations to the bubble collapse, but this, quote, violates its domain of applicability, according to Putterman and Wenninger. This violation occurs because Raleigh's equation is only for low Mach number motion, and the bubble collapse occurs at a high Mach number. Putterman and Wenninger also suggest that researchers misapply Saha's equation and Bremsstrahlung equations to this phenomena. Without getting too deep into the details of these equations, Saha's equation typically describes an ionization state of a gas relative to its temperature and pressure. Similarly, Bremsstrahlung equations typically describe electromagnetic radiation produced by the deceleration of a charged particle. At present, these equations do not adequately explain sonoluminescence for a variety of reasons. Some researchers believe that during sonoluminescence, bubbles have an inner core of plasma. In a study published in peer-reviewed journal Nature entitled Plasma Formation and Temperature Measurement During Single Bubble Cavitation, researchers state that, quote, emitting species must originate from collisions with high-energy electrons, ions, or particles from a hot plasma core. Other research supports the hypothesis that sonoluminescence bubbles have a hot plasma core. According to another recent publication called Evidence for a Plasma Core During Multi-Bubble Sonoluminescence in Sulfuric Acid, the observation of molecular and atomic ions is the first experimental demonstration of an inner ionized plasma core during single bubble cavitation. Thus, current research suggests that the core of the sonoluminescence bubbles may be plasma, the fourth fundamental state of matter. Perhaps this is the reason why fluid dynamic equations do not match the phenomenon. Researchers discovered that during sonoluminescence, a bubble rapidly expands, then contracts in cavitation. Looking deeper into this, researchers have found that the bubble does not operate within some conventional chemical laws. One of these is the fact that, as the bubble collapses, it rebounds because of van der Waals forces. The accompanying graph depicts a collapse of a cavitating bubble over time. Notice that the bubble has a peak radius of about 5.3 micrometers. The bubble then rapidly collapses at about 20 nanoseconds. As the bubble, quote, bottoms out, approaches the van der Waals radius, it springs back and oscillates through several cycles of expansion and contraction. Sonoluminescence appears to emit the most light with noble gases or noble gas mixtures. This is probably because of the inherent non-reactivity of the noble gas chemical group. Researchers use helium, neon, argon, and xenon to create sonoluminescence. Star and Ajar researchers use oxygen and nitrogen mixed with noble gas to create sonoluminescence in a laboratory. According to Putterman and Wenninger, sonoluminescence with only oxygen and nitrogen is difficult. A nitrogen and oxygen mixture produces a dim light. The article also states that noble gases concentrate in the bubble as cavitation occurs. This happens because the force of the bubble collapse causes reactive elements like H2O, N2, and O2 to dissociate. Then, the surrounding water draws these gases into it. An incredible example of sonoluminescence is the stun action of both the pistol and mantis shrimp. These predatory shrimp knock out their prey by loading their claws with tension and releasing it suddenly. The shrimp clamps its claws shut at such an extreme velocity that the surrounding water vaporizes. As in the laboratory form of sonoluminescence, this extreme cavitation produces the same light and extreme surface temperatures. However, this light is not visible to the naked eye as in the laboratory experiment. Researchers Detlev Lotz, Barbara Schmitz, and Michael Versluis have named this, quote, shrimpoluminescence. An article published in Nature regarding the topic called, quote, snapping shrimp make flashing bubbles, states plainly that SL occurs at the snap. It is not obvious why a bubble created by high-frequency sound contained in nothing more than a glass of water could reach temperatures close to the surface of the sun. Not surprisingly, researchers first looked at fluid dynamics to reach an explanation for sonoluminescence but found it lacking. Could plasma physics be the road by which an explanation will arrive? Will the electric universe model explain what is happening? As more research unfolds, a deeper understanding of the nature of this bridge between sound and light could lead to both greater scientific understanding and practical applications.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. For nearly half a century, the chief principles of the Thunderbolts Project have been presenting a scientific case for relatively recent celestial catastrophes in the inner solar system, within human memory. These events were recorded in the myths and storytelling of ancient man in prehistory. the dramas reverberating through generations and shaping the earliest civilizations. The catastrophes were electromagnetic in nature. Planets seen in the earthly sky discharging electrically, the thunderbolts of the gods. But what about more recent disasters, in the AD time periods? Disasters that also may have been triggered by fundamentally electromagnetic phenomena in the solar system. In recent episodes, Thunderbolt's colleague Peter Mungo Jupp has explored the voluminous evidence for the electrical nature of comets. As Jupp has noted, it is an unlikely coincidence that mankind viewed comets for millennia as harbingers of doom and destruction. In modern times, we witness the spectacular influence of a comet on a planet in Shoemaker-Levy 9's Close Encounter with Jupiter. In this episode, Jupp offers the provocative conjecture that such an encounter between our own planet and a cometary intruder may have caused an AD disaster that caused the death of tens of millions of human beings, the so-called Plague of Justinian.
Hey, what's up, my friend Calicanai here. In a moment, I'm going to step into my office here at my home and pull out my...
The so-called Plague of Justinian.
Thomas Short, writing in the 18th century, chronicled the many calamities that had decimated mankind over the last 4,000 years. Earthquakes, plagues, pestilence, incredibly overwhelming floods. But as you read through this curious book, you are intrigued by the number of comets associated with these dramas, unmatched in modern history.
In the early century of the Prison Era, the Romans at one time counted 50 comets in their skies. This is unheard of today. Were the skies over Rome the end of a bloody era that only in recent centuries has become stabilised? Can there be bones of truth in this mythology?
They are invariably connected to the major disasters, and up until the 1800s, mankind held a fear of comets. What happened? Then the Age of Reason struck, and incredibly, the number of highly visible comets shrunk. Had something happened? Eventually, by the end of the 20th century, it became scientific dogma that comets were dusty snowballs. How incredibly wrong this early scientific theory has been proven by modern science and its observation of comets.
So we've seen the dramatic effects comets can have on at least Jupiter and the Sun. But what about the planets, and particularly Earth? Have comets in the past had dramatic effects on Earth? And this is where we come to plague, war, flood, earthquakes, pestilence and famine. Has in fact the cosmos in the form of comets, the sun, planets in disturbed motion, or the outer reaches of the universe affected Earth and caused chaos? Has in fact this occurred on the Earth? Have comets caused the demise of civilizations? Claude Schaefer documented at least 6 destructions of civilizations prior to the Christian era, spanning at least 2,000 years.
But did later lower scale calamities also affect civilizations? I suspect yes. So now let's go to the first of these more recent deadly events. 1,500 years ago, a pungent plague nearly exterminated mankind.
The Emperor Justinian from Constantinople
Gave his name to this empire wrecker.
Thomas Short wrote, from 560 AD, a plague raged for 52 years, the like of which has never been seen before. Conventional wisdom maintains this worldwide plague began in Ethiopia and was carried by ship-borne rats to Europe and beyond. However, don't forget, with our new knowledge of bacteria and viruses being carried by vectors far above the Earth, this theory of deployment has been questioned. Our pertinent scrutiny asks, not only what caused this exterminating plague with its incredible and unmatched virulence, but whether some parallel catastrophic events had a similar foundational driver. It was totally chaotic in nature. It struck in many different seasons, with its virulence and invasiveness changed from city to city. And amongst every age group and gender, it was ruthlessly indiscriminate. And even if you survived, no immunity was guaranteed upon the next episode. Death was usually within 3 days from multiple causes: buboes and high fever, carbuncles and suicidal madness, but quick and immediate death. The mortality rate was horrific when compared to modern experiences of plague or any other pathology. Short says, for instance, that in ancient Constantinople, that's Istanbul, 10,000 people died a day when the plague struck. Placing this dreadful scourge aside and examining parallel events, we find some remarkable coincidences. During this plague period, no less than 9 highly visible comets were seen. Weird blood-coloured flashing skies and strangely multiple suns often accompanied this scenario. Also associated were 10 incredibly destructive earthquake storms. For instance, Antioch, 200,000 dead, and 7 worldwide mega famines. Accompanying this were totally chaotic and unseasonable weather, with cataclysmic inundations by water, wind and tempests. Now at this stage I emphasise these famines and other dramas were not normal occurrences. For instance, on several occasions, Short notes the famines were so devastating that women horrifically ate or sold their own children to survive. In the widespread earthquakes, whole towns were swallowed up and lakes formed and cities burned. Was this perhaps from methane seepage or massive lightning storms, plasmoids? Are these parallel events associated? The possibility of an electro-universe connection should be considered. For instance, what drives the virulence of bacteria? Stimulation of growth and degradation by ions, neutrons, electrons, and the spectrum of electromagnetic radiation are claimed from various sources. Thus, what place do not only solar events have to play in bacterial invasiveness, but possibly of mankind's classically dreaded comet? Comets, although they travel fairly well-defined elliptical orbits, are virtually undecoded phenomena. Some pass by the Sun harmlessly, some disintegrate and break into many sections, such as Shoemaker-Levy 9, when it collided with Jupiter. Others graze by the Sun with little known effect, whilst occasionally some bury themselves in the Sun and appear to translate to coronal mass ejections on the opposite side. The factors governing this seemingly but probably not chaotic behaviour is a mystery. However, we have come to understand they are negatively charged, somewhat like a mobile Z-pinch. They must therefore interrelate to other electrets. But the methodology of this behaviour is merely speculation, and certainly Short's novels show anecdotal evidence and suggest just this inferred behaviour. Of these 9 spectacular comets that occurred during the Justinian plague. Now, equally, we're satisfied that earthquakes are shaped in some way by electrical phenomena.
It's always been a puzzle to geologists where the energy of an earthquake comes from. The energy comes from the stored electric charge within the Earth. A discharge takes place beneath the Earth, then you must get effects on the surface that are felt. And the earthquake is one such consequence.
Right, so it's just like thunder and lightning, but it's beneath
It's
the
underground, yes.
Finally, weather is more and more being seen as an electrical phenomenon, certainly by EU advocates. In addition, chaos theory maintains that outside attractors establish a new harmonic. These constantly adjusting, perhaps radically adjusting, electromagnetic influences are the central cause of heavily chaotic, unseasonal and extreme weather such as floods. This in turn causes dramatic famine and drought. From all these possibly related events, short quotes, 2/3 of all people died. This is a summary from one of his primary sources, the Chronicle Magdeburg. This Justinian plague was preceded often by the appearance of several suns at the same time. Other times the sun was quite darkened. A comet appeared a whole year together, darting forth its beams like swords. The heavens seemed all of a flame and several other meteors fell. Nowadays, we automatically dismiss this evidence from a bygone era as fanciful, exaggerated and primitive. But there's bigger questions here. Could these cosmic dramas that influence weather also be driving plagues, locust inundations, earthquakes, and the very wars of mankind? And the big unanswered question, comets, historically always feared in man's history and legends. If a comet can hit Jupiter, Shoemaker Levy 9, or a comet can cause the sun to have a massive CME, could not they too be involved in this cosmic drama that affects weather, plague and earthquakes? Unanswered questions needing more investigation.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. The novelist Robertson Davies once stated, "The eye sees only what the mind is prepared to comprehend." In the 21st century, scientists on Earth are observing and gathering data in unprecedented detail on the remotest phenomena in the physical universe. Of course, as those who have followed this series are aware, what they actually find is routinely very different than what they expect. And what is the source of these surprises? Probably more than any physical science on Earth, in astrophysics and astronomy, where the essential tool is not a microscope, but a telescope, data can be interpreted a number of ways. In the sciences, as in life, invalid interpretations begin with erroneous assumptions. In the 20th century space sciences, one such assumption was that electric charge and currents cannot exist in the so-called vacuum of space. An intriguing insight into the common beliefs on the subject can be found in discussions on some popular websites. On the website Quora.com, the question is posed in the form of the query, "Does lightning exist in space?" The most viewed response attempts to answer as follows: "There is no lightning in space. Lightning is the result of ionization of air into a channel of plasma caused by strong electric field, in this context between a cloud and the ground. There is no air in space and nothing to get ionized. Strong electric field would produce nothing in space, and there would be no lightning." The notion that nothing exists in space to become ionized is of course laughable. Astrophysical plasmas, or quote, ionized gases, have been a subject of intense scientific and laboratory investigations for nearly a century. And even the notion of so-called space lightning at the vastest cosmic scales has more recently been appearing in astrophysical literature. In 2011, radio astronomers reported their measurement of the electric current in a nearly 150,000 light-year-long extragalactic jet. As reported in the New Scientist article, universe's highest electric current found. A cosmic jet 2 billion light-years away is carrying the highest electric current ever seen, 10 to the 18th power amps, equivalent to 1 trillion bolts of lightning. As we've reported more recently, new papers in peer-reviewed astrophysical journals propose that powerful electric currents flow in extragalactic jets, and that the jets themselves are, quote, fundamentally electromagnetic structures. However, if you follow science media, it's likely that you've not noticed any attempt to contextualize the development as significant for astrophysics. One person who has noticed this disconnect is Thunderbolt's colleague Christopher Reeve, who has spent many years documenting the online discourse on scientific controversies, including the occasional, quote, skeptical polemics against the electric universe and plasma cosmology. Recently, Chris published a commentary exploring why the recognition of vast cosmic electric currents has apparently yet to register, either with science journalists or most online commentators. Chris's initial comments were presented in an item posted by a Slashdot.org editor entitled, "Can Electricity Travel Through Space on Astrophysical Jets?" An October 2017 paper entitled "Electric Currents Along Astrophysical Jets" reports that, quote, several researchers have reported direct evidence for large-scale electric currents along astrophysical jets. A review of the citations at the end of that paper and others would seem to suggest that one of the great internet science debates has finally been settled. Electricity does indeed travel through space over vast cosmic distances. What has been interesting to watch about this unexpected development is that science journalists have so far not explicitly reported this as a shift in theory, and commenters on sites like phys.org appear to deny that any change has even occurred. Quote, the jets have been shown not to be electric currents. The energy and the physics involved are certainly not electromagnetic. This comment completely rejecting these new findings was highly rated by other phys.org readers, suggesting that the failure to explicitly report this as a change in theory has left this controversial topic in a highly confused state. With Chris's permission, we now present his full commentary, outlining the history of the controversy. I've been engaging people on these topics for around 12 years now. In fact, it was some peculiar interactions I observed here on Slashdot back in 2007 which greatly stimulated my interest in this topic. The idea that electricity flows through space is largely the brainchild of Hannes Alfvén, who earned the Nobel for his creation of magnetohydrodynamics, the math which models cosmic plasmas using fluid equations. What has not been particularly emphasized by scientists or the science journalists is that Alfvén realized towards the end of his career that the widespread application of magnetohydrodynamics in astrophysics was a huge mistake, and he used the opportunity of his 1970 Nobel acceptance speech for magnetohydrodynamics to explain to the astrophysical community why they should not be using magnetohydrodynamics to model cosmic plasmas. The exact history of what happened is difficult to track down, and I've never seen it fully told in an academic setting, which is really quite extraordinary in a history of science sense. Quoting The Plasma Universe of Hannes Alfvén by David Talbot, Alfvén's interest in magnetic fields laid the foundations of today's magnetohydrodynamic theory, a theory widely employed by astrophysicists. In the original formulations of the theory, Alfvén spoke of magnetic fields being, quote, frozen into neutral plasma, and the magnetohydrodynamic equations he formulated implied that the electric currents that create magnetic fields could be effectively ignored. Hence, the plasma activity on the Sun and in more remote space could be analyzed without reference to any larger domain of electric currents or electric circuits. To this notion, astronomers were readily attracted, and for a time, they thought they had an ally in the brilliant electrical engineer. Although his, quote, fundamental work and discoveries in magnetohydrodynamics led to his Nobel Prize in 1970, the background to this occasion is paradoxical. Through much of the 19th and 20th century, most astronomers and cosmologists had assumed the, quote, vacuum of space would not permit electric currents. Later, when it was discovered that all of space is a sea of electrically conductive plasma, the theorists reversed their position, asserting that any charge separation would be immediately neutralized. Here they found what they were looking for in Alfvén's frozen-in magnetic fields and in his magnetohydrodynamic equations. Electric currents could then be viewed as strictly localized and temporary phenomena, needed just long enough to create a magnetic field, to magnetize plasma, a virtually, quote, perfect conductor. The underlying idea was that space could have been magnetized in primordial times or in early stages of stellar and galactic evolution, all under the control of higher-order kinetics and gravitational dynamics. All large-scale events in space could still be explained in terms of disconnected islands, and it would only be necessary to look inside the, quote, islands to discover localized electromagnetic events. No larger electric currents or circuitry required. In this view, popularly held today, we live in a, quote, magnetic universe, the title of several recent books and articles, but not an electric universe. The point was stated bluntly by the eminent solar physicist Eugene Parker. No significant electric field can arise in the frame of reference of the moving plasma. But the critical turn in this story, the part almost never told within the community of astronomers and astrophysicists, is that Alfvén came to realize he had been mistaken. Ironically, and to his credit, Alfvén used the occasion of his acceptance speech for the Nobel Prize to plead with scientists to ignore his earlier work. Magnetic fields, he said, are only part of the story. The electric currents that create magnetic fields must not be overlooked, and attempts to model space plasma in the absence of electric currents will set astronomy and astrophysics on a course toward crisis. In accord with Alfvén's observations, American physicist Professor Alex Dessler, former editor of the journal Geophysical Research Letters, notes that he himself had originally fallen in with an academic crowd that believed electric fields could not exist in the highly conducting plasma of space. He stated, quote, "My degree of shock and surprise in finding Alfvén right and his critics wrong can hardly be described." In retrospect, it seems clear that Alfvén considered his early theoretical assumption of frozen-in magnetic fields to be his greatest mistake, a mistake perpetuated first and foremost by mathematicians attracted to Alfvén's magnetohydrodynamic equations. Alfvén came to recognize that real plasma behavior is too, quote, complicated and awkward for the tastes of mathematicians. It is a subject, quote, not at all suited for mathematically elegant theories. It requires hands-on attention to plasma dynamics in the laboratory. Sadly, he said, the plasma universe became the playground of theoreticians who have never seen a plasma in a laboratory. Many of them still believe in formulae which we know from laboratory experiments to be wrong. Again and again, Alfvén reiterated the point. The underlying assumptions of cosmologists today are, quote, developed with the most sophisticated mathematical methods. And it is only the plasma itself which does not, quote, understand how beautiful the theories are and absolutely refuses to obey them. There exists considerable confusion on this topic of electricity through space over cosmic plasmas, and it has been extraordinary to observe that this confusion is especially pronounced in the tech community. I have sought to document this bias in the tech community and elsewhere against electricity in space since I first observed it. Perhaps the most important untold story is about this mistaken assumption which formerly dominated astrophysics and cosmology, that space is basically empty, as in there is no interstellar matter. If you go back and look at what transpired, we can see that this mistake played an important part in the selection of theories and hypotheses. For example, Hannes Alfvén's 1937 proposal of a galactic magnetic field was, quote, met with widespread resistance, if not scorn, as it directly contradicted the prevailing wisdom that a vacuum filled interstellar space. A 1963 Popular Science interview with James Van Allen points out in big bold letters at the top of page 76, "Space was invented on Earth before we knew what was out there." The article explains, "I found Dr. Van Allen in Boston at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he was conferring with other space scientists. That evening over dinner, I asked him about newly discovered phenomena of, quote, empty space. Most people still think of space as a cold, black vacuum, I said. Is it true that scientists shared this misconception until very recently? Most scientists did think of space as a barren waste, he said. When we started getting real information, it was quite a revelation. The crucial turning point in our conception of space, of course, came in 1958, when we finally sent the first instrumented rockets up. These probes were pretty quickly recognized to be radioactive when they landed back on the Earth. This was a big surprise at the time, and within just a few years, the implications were openly discussed in the introductions to numerous astrophysical and plasma physics textbooks. For example, today it is recognized that 99.999% of all observable matter in the universe is in the plasma state, and plasmas are found at temperatures and densities far exceeding those that will support matter in the first 3 states. I've documented about 20 examples of these textbook admissions by now. Here's another one. Plasmas can be divided into 2 broad categories, natural and man-made. It is an interesting fact that most of the material in the visible universe, as much as 99% according to some estimates, is in the plasma state. This includes the sun, most stars, and a significant fraction of the interstellar medium. Thus, plasmas play a major role in the universe. Plasma physics is relevant to the formation of planetary radiation belts, the development of sunspots and solar flares, the acceleration of high-velocity winds that flow outward from the sun and other stars, the generation of radio emissions from the sun and other astrophysical objects, and the acceleration of cosmic rays. These more recent admissions by astrophysicists that electricity can flow through space therefore bear enormous importance. For it is today recognized that of the matter we can see, it is essentially almost entirely in the plasma state. So if we are modeling that plasma incorrectly, as observations of large-scale electrical jets seem to suggest, it stands to reason that certain perplexing mysteries, like dark matter, are likely to be explained by this mistake. Perplexingly, the Slashdot community has been overtly hostile to this simple notion that electricity can flow through space. Attempts to even just convey new findings in this area are either completely ignored or treated as pseudoscience, even when the announcements appear in established scientific journals. For example, here is another recent effort to inform the Slashdot community of a very important vindication for electricity in space. The previously controversial claim that, quote, astrophysical jets are fundamentally electromagnetic structures is becoming accepted by some astrophysicists. A summary of recent publications on the subject by Don Scott in particular notes the common presence of counter-rotating cylinders in black hole jets, a feature not expected by conventional models, yet a hallmark feature of Birkeland currents, which was mathematically described in a 2015 paper. Counter-rotating cylinders are considered an important prediction for the electric universe claim that large-scale electric currents travel through space over plasmas. This recent acknowledgement offers additional vindication for the historical claim that the history of Birkeland currents appears to be mired in politics. A 2007 Slashdot post titled, "Astronomers Again Baffled by Solar Observations," elicited a number of hostile reactions by Slashdot readers. That the electric universe is obviously a, quote, crackpot theory. But what happens if astrophysicists start to widely acknowledge that large-scale electric currents do indeed flow through space? It would seem that a mistaken bias against electricity in space continues to dominate conversations to this day, and will surely continue to do so for some time to come. But it also increasingly appears that these convictions are today out of step with the current claims of the astrophysical community. So, in a sense, we now see the Slashdot community largely unaware that a huge theoretical shift has occurred, and that a lot of ridicule and dismissals in this community need to now be reevaluated in the light of the recent recognition that electricity does indeed travel through space. If I had to guess what will happen next, people will probably start suggesting, as they tend to do, that everybody actually already knew that electricity travels through space. But the only way to find out how people are going to react is to finally start reporting on this situation. The conversation is way past due at this point.
We are National University, a veteran-founded, military-friendly, San Diego-based nonprofit.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In part one of this presentation, Thunderbolts contributor archaeologist Peter Mungo Jupp began his comprehensive analysis on the nature of comets, including the Electric Universe perspective that comets are not 4.5 billion-year-old icy leftovers of the early solar system. Included in his analysis, Jupp presented outtakes of his interview with physicist Wal Thornhill, recorded a few years ago, discussing Thornhill's perspective on comet origins. In this episode, we begin with Thornhill explaining why the notion of comets as sublimating ice balls cannot explain most comet activity.
The other thing is that if you have one of these objects, if it was just a ball of icy dust approaching the sun, what would happen is that the ice would turn to a gas and it should just blow off like a kind of a wind. But that's not what we see. We see these very well-defined jets. And we also see bright spots on the nucleus when they photograph the nucleus.
Okay.
And those bright spots are unexplained. But in the electrical model, of course, that is the point where the arcs are coming from.
Okay, yep. And that's from within the comet itself. And is this the reason you get this huge tail of discharge on the comet? Is that?
It's one of the reasons why you get these well-collimated jets of very fine material, because it's the sort of technique used in electrical sputtering, the coating of astronomical mirrors and so on, where you just take atoms at a time off a surface, off a cathode, and then attract them towards a charged surface, or you just have them floating in space, if you like, and then they land on the mirror, the glass surface, and form this coating of metal just a few atoms thick.
And so these atoms are shunted way out in space on the tail of the comet?
Yes, and they're
phosphorescing, if for want of a better word, or...
Well, they're glowing because they're an electrical discharge, and the trajectory that they take is that which is also seen in the laboratory in an electrical discharge, this parabolic curve. And there's plenty of evidence that this is the kind of thing we should expect. For instance, on Io, the so-called volcanoes of Io, they too are cathode jets. And they're very distinctive in that, unlike any volcano known on Earth, they deposit their material in a ring. But this is characteristic of an electrical discharge because it sorts the material according to atomic or molecular weight. And it follows a distinct trajectory.
Okay, now, so we've got a little bit of the nature of the comet now, which is basically a negatively charged body moving towards the sun. And something else happens then. It can either go past the sun, it can split and explode, just like Shoemaker-Levy 9 did when it impacted on, or flash impacted, I like to call it, on Jupiter, or it can actually hit the sun. Now, what happens when it hits the sun? Well, we've got photos or movies of this sort of thing, and usually it seems...
Yes, well, the electrical influence of a comet extends to the boundary of its coma. And the coma of some comets, like the recent one of Hartley, was bigger than the sun. So this tiny lump of rock has an electrical influence which extends over a vast volume.
So they're incredibly powerful compared to their physical size.
Absolutely. And so you can understand then that intrusion of a charged body near a charged sun can give rise to a sudden discharge from the sun. In other words, a coronal mass ejection.
Okay, and that's on the opposite side of the sun, or at least the films I've seen.
Well, actually, you get effects occurring on opposite sides of the sun almost simultaneously, which is absolutely impossible if the sun is powered internally.
Yep.
Yeah.
However, if the sun is an electrical body, that is possible because the influences are coming from outside and they can be synchronized electrically.
So this huge corona, I think you called it, as it flies towards the sun, is exhibiting a massive impact, effect or discharge effect on the sun.
Yes.
And this coronal mass ejection is nearly as big as the sun in some cases, if not bigger.
Oh, they're huge. Yeah.
So the puny little comet isn't quite so puny. And carrying on this thing, when Shoemaker-Levy 9 split into 23 pieces as it headed towards Jupiter.
On the first go around Jupiter, it split up.
That's when it split into 23 sections.
And then it went into an orbit where they were able to predict that it would.
Now, you think this split up is another electrical phenomenon?
Sure. Comets inexplicably split and fragment as they cross the ecliptic, usually, which is the current sheet of the sun, or when they're approaching the sun, when the voltage on the surface is changing rapidly. And the reason for that is that any body in the universe of any considerable mass will have an internal gravitational field, albeit maybe weak, but that gravitational field will offset all of the positively charged particles, which are heavier, more massive, towards the centre of the object, and the electrons will then adopt elliptical orbits with the nucleus at a focus which is nearer the centre. In other words, every atom in that object will be a tiny electric dipole.
Okay.
So every object of any considerable size in the universe will have the characteristics of an electret, which is an object which maintains an electric field.
Right, that's an interesting term, electret.
Electret, yeah. So a comet, if sufficient charge is either removed or added to one of these bodies, it can cause internal discharges through the body of the comet, and this is what I call earthquake. This is the harbinger of an earthquake. Now, on a small body like a comet, that earthquake is sufficient to shatter it quite often.
So this is the effect of the electrical.
This is the electrical effect. Yeah. I mean, the same thing happens on Earth. Earthquakes are underground lightning.
Right, precisely.
So that explains the fragmentation. And the very fine particles that you see in the jets and that are all just part of this whole electrical aspect of comets.
So we have some good ideas as to how comets are created by ejection from, say, Jupiter, Saturn, etc. And we have some understanding about their electrical nature. But what about what we now know is its rocky terrain? Gone are the days of the farcical, dusty snowball comet. If, for instance, we take Comet P69 as an example, there is no doubt its topography closely resembles that of many planets such as Mercury and Mars. It's complete with valleys, electrical erosion, sand fields and rocky outcrops. But comets, unlike major planets and most moons, are not spherical. We're not sure why, but in fact a large percentage of imaged comets and their similar sisters asteroids have nuclei that are double, even triple lobed. Now, where have I seen this before? Many comets and asteroids have a remarkable similarity to the thunder egg seen on Earth. And if, as Wald Thornwell often says, electrical phenomena are scalable, we may have an example on a much smaller scale of a comet structure. Creation of similar tectites by C.J. Ransom in the Vermasat laboratories by electrical discharge may hold the key to an understanding of both asteroids, comets and planets. Now, thunder egg rocks come in an incredible array. Look at these ones I'm about to show you. Some are hollow, some have crystalline interiors, some have gaseous enclosures, and some are filled with liquid. Star-shaped interiors, you name it. Depending on the layer the thunder eggs were found in, rapid progression from spherical to double and triple lobe rocks develop. I'll just read you a little bit from Robert Colburn, who wrote, if you like, the quintessential information on thunder eggs. This is his quote on the formation of thunder eggs. On the bedrock, in contrast with the ashy clay, some eggs could be pried off whole, with more melded into doubles, triples, or even clusters. Most broke apart, revealing a hollow top consisting of a thin layer of chalcedony coating the walls of the egg's interior. Horizontally banded waterline opal is contained within the thin concentric layer and occupying from 1/4 to 1/2 of the interior at the bottom, with the tops being flat floors, some with chalky surfaces that can be scraped with a fingernail. Perhaps we can get closer to understanding thunder eggs by approaching them as gas cavities filled with water-based minerals, like those of amygdaloids, an idea fairly well accepted by most geologists. An amygdaloid is a mineral-filled gas cavity found in basalt and andesite lava. So let's begin with a question. How homogeneous is the Earth? And for that matter, comets and meteors. Is it moulded within by strict circular boundaries, or is it perhaps like the internals of this classic thunder egg with a 3D star-shaped interior? Plasma pioneers such as C.J. Ransom, remember, recreated spherical Martian rock blueberries in the lab with electrical discharge techniques. Were thunder eggs created by similar measures? And if electrical effects are scalable, could our larger Earth body perhaps replicate a thunder egg formation with its gaseous enclosures and spiky outreaches that may perhaps resemble the jets of a comet? Now let's take this a little further. Thomas Gold, in his book The Deep Biosphere, makes a strong case for the intervention of gas upwelling as a powerful but neglected process in the workings of large hydrocarbon deposits, either gaseous, liquid or solid, from deep within our own Earth. But perhaps even Gold failed to realise the effects of electrical telluric currents swayed by cosmic effects as the primal cause of the chaotic meandering of gases and liquids within charged bodies. Were they the agent that caused cometary instabilities? As Walt Thornhill has always pointed out, the planets, comets and asteroids are electrets, or charged bodies, revolving in a constantly changing cosmic electromagnetic environment. They thus react with other charged bodies working towards electrical equilibrium. Thus our big question, could comet interiors also possess hydrocarbon enclosures, the kerogens, oil, coal, etc.? Nicolas Beaver of the Paris Observatory, France, lead author of a paper on the discovery published October 23rd in Science Advances, found that Comet Lovejoy was releasing as much alcohol as at least 500 bottles of wine every second during its peak activity. The team found 21 different organic molecules in gas from the comet, including ethyl alcohol and glycolaldehyde, a simple sugar. Further, in July, the European Space Agency reported that the Philae lander from its Rosetta spacecraft in orbit around Comet 67P detected 16 organic compounds as it descended toward and then bounced across the comet's surface. According to the agency, some of the compounds detected play key roles in the creation of amino acids, nucleobases, and sugars from simple building block molecules. So where does this all lead us? We've certainly learned the comet is an electrical phenomenon. We've learned that it's not a dusty snowball, it's solid. It moves in elliptical orbits of various combinations. But most important of all, I believe the next comet revelation will be...
Hey, what's up, my friend Caliconai here. And in a moment, I'm going to step into my office here at my home.
News from the spectacular electromagnetic phenomena in nature are a wonder to the senses. From the dazzling flash of a bolt of lightning, to the dancing lights of the aurora borealis, and even St. Elmo's fire, a luminous plasma phenomenon seen on the masts of ships or on the wings of airplanes. Our eyes bear witness to our planet's dynamic and still mysterious electrical environment. But sight is not the only sense by which we detect electrical phenomena. We have reported on new scientific research which affirms the existence of electrostatic sounds associated with atmospheric phenomena, including the crackling and whistling noises associated with auroras, and the electrophonic sounds produced by some meteors. Today, new scientific research suggests that another highly controversial audible phenomenon may indeed be physically real. Not a crackle nor a whistle, but rather a hum. Since at least the mid-20th century, witnesses around the world have reported hearing a puzzling, consistent humming sound with no identifiable physical source. For decades, a majority of media attention has focused on the so-called Taos hum, the mysterious buzzing sound heard by many in the desert of Taos, New Mexico. Speculations have ranged from the mundane to the very exotic, and skeptics have wondered if the phenomenon really exists at all. But residents of Taos are not the only ones to have reported a mysterious hum sound. In fact, similar audible phenomena have been reported over vast regions of North America, Europe, and across the globe from South America to Australia. Is the hum physically real? And if so, is the source natural or man-made? In this episode, Thunderblog contributor Jimmy Micketts offers a compelling summary of the controversial question, including the possibility that the hum is electromagnetic in nature.
The Mysterious Hum by Jimmy Micketts. You hear a low rumble that sounds like it is about a mile away. You go outside, but this annoying noise is actually louder in your house.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. Today, we continue our examination of arguably the most perplexing meteorite ever discovered on planet Earth. As science headlines have announced in recent weeks, the so-called Hypatia stone, a tiny rock fragment found in a Libyan desert glass field, is, quote, rattling the solar system status quo, challenging astronomers' fundamental ideas about our solar system's formation and history. In 2015, a number of research teams reported that the material could not be identified based on any known type of meteorite or comet. As reported by Phys.org in January of 2018, new scientific research by a team at the University of Johannesburg has, quote, provided unsettling answers that spiral away from conventional views of the material our solar system was formed from. The matrix of minerals composing the Hypatia stone resembles no known meteorite or comet fragment, and consists of strange and never-before-seen combinations of minerals. The dust material found in the fragments confounds the very core of the solar nebular hypothesis. As described by Phys.org, generally, science says that our solar system's planets ultimately formed from a huge, ancient cloud of interstellar dust, the solar nebula in space. The first part of that process would be much like dust bunnies coagulating in an unswept room. Science also holds that the solar nebula was homogeneous, that is, the same kind of dust everywhere. But Hypatia's chemistry tugs at this view. Scientists analyzing the fragments suggest they may be pieces of a deep space cometary intruder which impacted Earth around 29 million years ago. But it's essential to remember what we've actually observed when comets have encountered planets in modern times. On two occasions in recent decades, when astronomers have been able to anticipate close encounters between comets and planets, the electromagnetic effects have been exponentially greater than scientists had anticipated. When Shoemaker-Levy 9 reached Jupiter in 1994, the electromagnetic explosion and unprecedented brightening of the gas giant's radiation belts, quote, knocked the astronomical world off its feet. More recently, when comet sighting spring approached Mars, NASA's MAVEN team was amazed when the comet, quote, blew off part of Mars's upper atmosphere. And the electrical nature of these kinds of events is finally becoming a part of mainstream science literature. In 2017, A scientific study published in the Geophysical Research Letters proposed that the mysterious radiophonic sounds produced by some meteors may ultimately be caused by giant electric fields driving electric currents. In this episode, our guest archaeologist Peter Mungo Jupp continues his case that the Hypatia stone's bizarre composition may have resulted from the transmutation of elements by high-energy electrical discharge.
Although reference is made to the Hypatia stone's positioning in the green glass fields of Libya, it's merely assumed that this part of a disintegrating comet allied with the formation of the petal. Why is not the green glass, or silicon, unique as well? Further, the vast stretches of sand that make up the underlying component of both of these geological curios are themselves relatively historic, as judged by the Egyptian sources and petroglyphs strongly related to modern man. Now also, we've got to take into account the existence nearby of Oasis crater and Kibera crater. They may be well involved in producing these tektite-like formations. These could well be plasma discharge craters with electrical machining able to produce effects over a wide area. The newly discovered role of electrical discharge in producing not only shock quartz, but in all probability, shock diamonds is not taken into account. A new study from the University of Pennsylvania reinforces this alternate, but I suspect prime method of shocked rock creation. And I quote, "To bolster the notion the rocks were beat up in an extraterrestrial impact, geologists search for a distinctive signature, that is microscopic bands in the mineral quartz created when powerful pressure waves ripple through the rock. This study suggests that a different sort of shock can create the same banding patterns, that is, a lightning bolt." The result of the study could cast further doubt on claims of asteroid impacts that relied on observations of shock quartz. Now let's pause for a moment. This could even more apply to Anthony Peratt's historic plasma discharge events, which are theorized to be millions of times more powerful than ordinary lightning. Mythology often talks of the cosmic thunderbolt. Could the Oasis crater be the result of such a strike? Does mythology provide us with examples from this area? In Greek mythology, such as Ovid's Metamorphoses, Phaeton set out but was entirely unable to control the sun chariot's horses. They wandered too close to the earth and began to scorch it. To prevent further damage, Zeus, or as we know him, Jupiter, hurled a cosmic thunderbolt at Phaeton, who fell to the earth at the mouth of the river Eridanus in the Red Sea. Such an archetypal scenario may often reveal historical clues to a geological disaster. Moreover, the role of electrical discharge in creating new elements and compounds, as per Matsumoto's studies of cold electrofusion, does not rate a mention. A cosmic electrode discharge or magnetic reversal with its massive attendant current flow has shattering power. Particularly in the case of a major Z-pinch effect occurring above or below the Earth, this could be a decisive factor in explaining the curious so-called cosmic mixture of compounds and elements found in the Hypatia stone. Finally, the noting of the rarer C13 isotope of carbon as distinct from carbon-12, which is mainly found in crustal carbon deposits, assumes a cosmic origin for the carbon components of the pebble. However, deep earth layers of methane, kerogens, petroleum and concretized crack filling, as mentioned by Thomas Gold, are well sourced with much higher levels of C13. So this may well be a simpler explanation for the source of this phenomenon. And I just note in passing the possibility of scenarios of cosmic naphtha, or petroleum, pervading the atmosphere, mentioned in ancient historical sources such as the Talmud. It's also a clear possibility if we can rely on historical fact. Just remember, so often in science, we reject the clear witnesses to events in ancient history not seen today. Can you imagine an atmospheric invasion of volatile hydrocarbons? Well, maybe a source of diamonds when a plasma discharge enters it. So let's discuss some of the counters to the extraterrestrial theory. The Hypatia stone differs from the normal chondritic meteorites due to the dominance of carbon as distinct from silicon. It also contains compounds not normally found in Earth-source rocks. But could it nevertheless be an ejection from a faraway impact source similar to silicon-based tektites? Tektites too are claimed to be produced by impacts that created tiny, classically shaped rocks. These then travel long distances to be found in a few strewn fields around the world. But remember, they're essentially made of material from the impact source. Could not the extraordinary conditions needed for tektite production be a similar methodology? Remember, there are several different types of tektites, even if they are essentially silicon-based. This presumption of a cosmic source for tektites, however, rests purely on the pebble's relative uniqueness. However, I would advocate that a massive plasma discharge, rather than a conventional meteor impact, presents a more likely scenario for the eccentric creation of the Hypatia stone's rare combination of compounds.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. It's a notion that generations of astronomers have agreed upon with nearly unanimous consent. That the clockwork predictability we see in our solar system today can be traced back over countless eons of time. The planets and the sun formed about a swirling disk of gas and dust through a process of gravitational collapse and accretion. And for billions of years, their respective orbits have remained undisturbed. On our own planet, it's presumed that the geological processes we see on Earth today can be traced back over many millions of years, since a giant asteroid impact killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. This is the picture of our solar system's 4.5 billion year history, sanctioned for publication in educational textbooks for many decades. But this picture is incrementally changing in the face of an ever-growing evidentiary crisis. The belief that our solar system formed from a collapsing nebular cloud finds no parallel in the thousands of exoplanetary systems scientists have discovered, including planets with bizarre retrograde orbits, and Jupiter-sized planets orbiting tiny parent stars at a fraction of the distance separating the Earth from the Sun. In fact, with increasing regularity, mainstream scientific literature acknowledges that our solar system has undergone dramatic changes, making it a very different place than it was after its formation. Recently, scientists surveying nearly 1,000 exoplanets in over 300 multi-planet systems discovered an astonishing pattern. Planets that share a star appear like, quote, peas in a pod, with planetary neighbors of consistently similar sizes and regular orbital spacing. On the ramifications of these findings for an understanding of our own solar system, a recent Phys.org report states, in our solar system, the inner planets have surprisingly large spacing and diverse sizes. Abundant evidence in the solar system suggests that Jupiter and Saturn disrupted our system's early structure, resulting in the 4 widely spaced terrestrial planets we have today. As those who have followed the Thunderbolts project are aware, for many decades, our chief principals have proposed such a disruption to our solar system structure, though not billions of years in the past. And these catastrophes were not typified by random impacts, but by electrical discharges between planets. Rocky planets and moons reveal bizarre cratering patterns and other features that have been easily reproduced in decades of laboratory experiments with electrical discharges. Material removed from planetary surfaces formed our solar system's comets, asteroids, and meteoroids, a, quote, radical notion to which scientific discovery lends increasing support. Today, scientific research into arguably the most perplexing meteorite ever found on Earth is, quote, rattling the solar system's status quo, challenging astronomers' fundamental ideas about our solar system's formation and history. Since 2013, scientists on Earth have been studying fragments from the so-called Hypatia stone, a tiny meteorite found in a Libyan desert glass field in southwest Egypt. In 2015, a number of research teams announced that the material cannot be identified based on any known type of meteorite or comet. As reported by Phys.org in January of this year, new scientific research by a team at the University of Johannesburg has, quote, provided unsettling answers that spiral away from conventional views of the material our solar system was formed from. The matrix of minerals composing the Hypatia stone has been described as a, quote, fruitcake, resembling no known meteorite or comet, and consisting of strange and never-before-seen combinations of minerals. And the dust material found in the fragments confounds the very core of the solar nebular hypothesis. As described by Phys.org, generally, science says that our solar system's planets ultimately formed from a huge, ancient cloud of interstellar dust, the solar nebula in space. The first part of that process would be much like dust bunnies coagulating in an unswept room. Science also holds that the solar nebula was homogeneous, that is, the same kind of dust everywhere, but Hypatia's chemistry tugs at this view. Lead investigator Professor John Kramer states, for starters, there are no silicate minerals in Hypatia's matrix, in contrast to chondritic meteorites, and planets like the Earth, Mars, and Venus, where silicates are dominant. Then there are the exotic mineral inclusions. If Hypatia itself is not pre-solar, both features indicate that the solar nebula wasn't the same kind of dust everywhere, which starts tugging at the generally accepted view of the formation of our solar system. In part one of this two-part presentation, Thunderbolt's colleague Peter Mungo Jupp begins an examination of the Hypatia stone as we explore the object's ramifications for the electric universe theory.
The Hypatia stone, was it a comet or a cosmic thunderbolt?
Your business goes where you go, and you go everywhere.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In our previous episode, we introduced a potential scientific breakthrough that could have profound implications for all of cosmology, eliminating the perceived need for dark matter. In recent years, retired professor of electrical engineering Dr. Donald Scott has composed an original modeling of the structure of a Birkeland current. The visual signature of the Birkeland current is counter-rotating cylinders, which are clearly seen in the earthly auroras, at the north poles of Jupiter and Saturn, and as seen in these recent images, even at the poles of Neptune. In the electric universe, Birkeland currents flow across interplanetary, interstellar, and even intergalactic space, organizing material across the vastest cosmic distances. In a new scientific paper entitled Birkeland Currents and Dark Matter, scheduled for publication in April of this year, Dr. Scott proposes that his model of the Birkeland current may finally help explain anomalous stellar velocity profiles, with no need for dark matter. In this episode, Dr. Scott summarizes his new paper, beginning with a review of his previous findings on the Birkeland current structure.
As most people who've seen space news realize, I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago to develop a model for the so-called Birkeland current. The Birkeland currents, just to bring everybody up to speed, is the shape that the clouds of charges that emanate from, well, one example is that emanate from the sun and that go down into the North Pole and the South Pole of Earth to create the aurora borealis and the aurora australis. That's the Birkeland current. And Birkeland was famous for essentially postulating the existence of those currents. And it was only after World War II that when we sent the United States Navy, I think it was, sent some rockets up there, they found out that Birkeland was right. That's what was powering the aurora. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, the question is nobody ever knew what shape those charges took on. Did they come in a cylinder like a pipeline, or did they sort of diffuse like a fire hose, or what form, what structure, if any, did those charges have as they came through space? My model, which was actually started by a fellow named Lundquist, and I finished the derivation and interpreted what the results meant. And there's a graph that I sent you there. What that is a picture of, if you can visualize it in your mind's eye, this is a picture of what happens to the magnetic field that surrounds the Birkeland current as a function of your distance away from the center line of the Birkeland current. So if you visualize you're standing up in Canada looking at the side of the Alaskan pipeline, let's say, and there's this big pipe in front of you, and it's running from left to right. And the horizontal axis on that graph is the distance your eye is from the center of the pipeline, okay? So as you back away from the center of the pipeline, you're going from left to right on that graph. So at zero, that is to say at the axis of that picture, you're right smack dab in the center of the Birkeland current. And the red curve is a description of the strength of the current density, that is the current flowing down that pipe from left to right, and also the magnetic field, because the magnetic field and the current density are hand in hand, parallel. They go right along together like two twins. And so you can see that at the center, that red curve is a maximum, and it's at 1. And the blue curve is the component of the, let's say, the current density that surrounds, like you were wrapping that pipeline with a tape. Well, that's the direction of the magnetic field and the current density that is shown by the blue curve. There's two vectors. You got one pointing down the pipeline and one pointing around and wrapping around the pipeline. If you add those two vectors, you get the green curve. You can see there's a green curve that sort of starts off at 1, and then it comes down. There's a little bit of a wiggle in around radius 3 or 4, but eventually it hides behind that purple curve. Well, that purple curve is just a plot of, if you look over at the legend on the right-hand side, of the radius to the minus 1/2 power. That is, it's 1 over the square root of the radius. So the purple curve is a plot of 1 over the square root of r. And that's what my model says happens. It says that the current density, if you're in the middle of the pipeline, is quite high. It's very dense. It's a strong current. It's a strong magnetic field. And as you come out, these two different components, the sort of the axial component, the red line, the magnitude is the red curve, and the wraparound, which is the blue curve, that sum varies as that purple curve does. Actually, it's the green curve, but the green curve, you can see, hides right behind the purple one. So the bottom line of that whole diagram says that the strength of the magnetic field and the current density as a function of radius out from the center of the Birkeland current is given by the radius distance that you're out there, to take the square root of it and 1 over that. And so it decays, and it decays down very slowly, but eventually, it's an infinite distance out, it'll go to 0. About a year ago, I started to think about, what else can I find out about this Birkeland current? The result is, and I won't bore you with the mathematics, but the key that unlocked it for me was the current density in amperes per square meter of going down that pipe is equal to the product of the charge density, that is, how many coulombs per cubic meter have you got inside that pipe, times the velocity of that cubic meter. So visualize you've got a square cube, say a meter on the side. It's got 1.5 gazillion electrons in it, or protons or whatever, and it's traveling. It's moving from left to right. Well, that constitutes the current. And my model said, well, we know what that product is. We know what the current density is. So here's the key.
If you know what the velocity is, you can tell from that little equation that the current density equals the charge density times the velocity. If you know what the velocity is, you can get the charge density. Or vice versa. If you know what the charge density is, you can get the velocity because you know what the product is. So the question is, well, where do you go from there? Well, there's a lot of talk these days about the fact that these Birkeland currents, huge versions of them, not the kind that just go into the North Pole of Earth, but the kind that actually feed galaxies, are feeding galaxies, and galaxies are forming in strings. Those strings are Birkeland currents. And so we know what the velocity of rotation of those galaxies are. I think I've included a picture there of M33 galaxy, and there's a graph of the velocity in kilometers per second versus the radial distance out from the center of the galaxy. And so I made an assumption. Now, it's a big assumption. It's a big if. But if I'm right, and if Birkeland currents do feed those galaxies, the galaxies form on those Birkeland currents due to the Z-pinch effect, then you can look at that curve and you say, hey, that's the velocity. I know what the velocity is. It begins as the yellow curve from starlight, and it continues on from the 21 centimeter hydrogen data that goes out. But it looks like the velocity goes up very quickly as you move out from the center of the galaxy. And then it doesn't slow down. It keeps getting faster, but it gets faster at a very slower rate. And that's called the stellar velocity profile of a galaxy. And that's been measured for decades. Well, the problem is that the people who looked at that first were Fritz Zwicky and Jan Oort. Looked at these curves, this one's very much like this, and said, oh, that's not what Newton's laws say should happen. On that curve, you see there's a dotted line, and it says this is expected from the visible disk. Well, this is what's expected from Newton's laws. The velocity should get lower with increasing radius, not higher. Well, that was a big puzzlement, and so astronomers at least began to publish papers, and they all settled. There's invisible matter out there that's changing the equation, and there's really more mass out there than we thought. If you include this missing invisible, somebody named it dark matter, then that curve will be as we measured it there, that one that continues to increase with radial values. Make a long story short, these guys, these astronomers, have been hunting for this dark matter for 85 years. And there's been experiment after experiment after experiment to try to find the dark matter that gives it that stellar profile of M33 a rational explanation. And they haven't found it. They've come up with strongly self-interacting dark matter, repulsive dark matter, self-annihilating dark matter, fuzzy dark matter. Well, it goes on. It's ridiculous. They don't know why Newton's laws don't work in those galaxies. And there was a fellow by the name of Matti Milgrom. He came up with the proposal we have to modify Newton's laws. That's not true. In real science, if you do 24 experiments and they all fail to give you the answer you think you're looking for, there's one thing you can do and only one thing you can do, and that is to throw out your hypothesis and come up with another hypothesis. Well, astronomers have been adamantly opposed to anything electrical. They never liked Birkeland's ideas of charges flowing through space in the first place. But anyway, if you just make some substitutions for what the charge density should be in those equations, bingo, what falls out of those equations is a picture very much like the picture there of M33. The charge density is 1 over r. The velocity in these stars, really, in the real world, and they've been measured like this for 85 years now, they vary as the square root of r. And so the last picture is a comparison of the predicted and actual stellar velocities. So if you take my model of the Birkeland current and assume that it's feeding the rotation in the Birkeland current is responsible for the rotation of the galaxy, that is the comparison between the actual velocity, which is that sort of wiggly, lazy S curve, and the square root of r is the smoother curve there. And that's exactly what my Birkeland current model predicts should happen. So there's no surprises. And these guys have been chasing their tails down a box canyon for 85 years now, looking and crying out that they know that dark matter exists, but they can't find it. That's because there's no reason for it. There's no reason for it.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. For many decades, standard cosmology has proposed a universe that is disconnected, incoherent, chaotic, strange, and literally dark. In this cosmology, around 96% of the universe is invisible and undetectable, composed of the mysterious entities dark matter and dark energy. In the early 20th century, some noted astronomers proposed the concept of dark matter as a possible solution to the anomalous stellar rotation profiles in galaxies. The mystery was, why do Newtonian dynamics fail to explain the impossibly high velocities of rotation of the outer stars and galaxies? Later scientists using galaxy rotation curves also proposed the apparent need for many times more dark matter than visible mass. For the last 85 years, scientists on Earth have hypothesized many different types of dark matter, and the search continues in earnest today, with astronomical sums invested in the technological quest to prove dark matter's existence. Yet rather than finding any confirmation of dark matter, space scientists have been left empty-handed, with only an ever-growing list of unresolved puzzles. One such new puzzle completely confounds all theoretical predictions for the standard lambda-cold dark matter model. A team of scientists studying the elliptical galaxy Centaurus A has made the astonishing discovery that the galaxy is orbited by a number of dwarf satellites arranged in a, quote, narrow disk. This kind of coherent, non-random arrangement of host galaxies and their satellites is completely unexpected in standard cosmology. As noted in a recent Phys.org report, under the lambda cold dark matter model, smaller systems of stars should be more or less randomly scattered around their anchoring galaxies and should move in all directions. To understand just how problematic this discovery is for standard cosmology, these models and simulations have predicted that only 0.5% of nearby satellite galaxy systems should exhibit this kind of pattern. However, to astronomers' complete bafflement, 14 of the 16 Centaurus A satellites display this pattern of common rotation along the main galaxy's plane. And this is not the first instance when scientists have documented satellite dwarf galaxies co-rotating in a, quote, preferentially oriented alignment around a central galactic mass, producing a, quote, vast polar structure. As noted in the Phys.org report, scientists have measurements for 11 Milky Way satellite galaxies, 8 of which are orbiting in a tight disk perpendicular to the spiral galaxy's plane. There are probably other satellites in the system that can't be seen from Earth because they're blocked by the Milky Way's dusty disk. An earlier study also found that out of the nearby Andromeda galaxy's 27 dwarf satellites, 15 show the same impossible alignment. A lead author of the study said of the new findings, "There should be pure chaos and not order. To find everywhere we look this extreme order where we expect disorder, this is strange." Study co-author Marcel Pawlowski stated, "This means that we are missing something. Either the simulations lack some important ingredient, or the underlying model is wrong. This research may be seen as support for looking into alternative models." Such alternative models offered by the electric universe and plasma cosmology can no longer be ignored by institutional science. In the electric universe, Birkeland current filaments pervade all of space, traveling from the sun to the Earth to power the auroras, flowing through molecular clouds and electromagnetically pinching material to form stars, and even organizing material over the vastest cosmic distances to form galaxies. In this view, space has a substructure of twisted pair current filaments, with stars and galaxies forming along them like pearls on a string. In a forthcoming episode, retired professor of electrical engineering Dr. Donald Scott will explain why cosmic-scale Birkeland currents may indeed eliminate the perceived need for dark matter. In a scientific paper published in 2015, Dr. Scott offered his original modeling of a Birkeland current structure, identified visually as counter-rotating cylinders, as seen in the earthly auroras, and at the poles of the gas giants Saturn and Jupiter, respectively. Scheduled for publication in April of this year in the journal Progress in Physics, Dr. Scott's paper, Birkeland Currents in Dark Matter, explores the Birkeland current as an explanation for the mysterious stellar velocity profiles within galaxies. As seen in this graph, the predicted stellar velocities based on Dr. Scott's model and the actual stellar velocities measured over nearly a century compare remarkably well. In this brief clip of his forthcoming presentation, Dr. Scott explains as follows.
The velocity in these stars, really, in the real world, and they've been measured like this for 85 years now, they vary as the square root of r. The last picture is a comparison of the predicted and actual stellar velocities. So if you take my model of the Birkeland current and assume that it's feeding the rotation in the Birkeland current is responsible for the rotation of the galaxy. That is the comparison between the actual velocity, which is that sort of wiggly, sort of a very lazy S-curve, and the square root of r is the smoother curve there. And that's exactly what my Birkeland current model predicts should happen. So there's no surprises. And these guys have been chasing their tails down a box canyon for 85 years now, looking and crying out that they know that dark matter exists, but they can't find it. That's because there's no reason for it.
For Dr. Scott's full interview, and for ongoing analysis of these scientific developments, stay tuned to Space News from the Electric Universe. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. A new picture of the cosmos is emerging, a vastly different picture than the one astronomers have been painting for over a century, but a picture that was drawn many decades ago by specialists in plasma and the electrical sciences. In this picture, antiquated notions of charge neutrality in space have been erased, replaced with theoretical models which recognize the pervasive conductive medium, or fifth state of matter called plasma, through which electric currents flow throughout the cosmos. For many decades, electric currents were, and in some instances remain, verboten in the space sciences. But with improved instrumentation and ever finer data, cosmic electric currents at all scales are now undeniable. Nevertheless, a strange dilemma is unfolding in astronomy and astrophysics. Scientists attempt to explain electric currents in space through theoretical models in which electricity does not cause anything. But as we will see, electric currents in space are not just a curious byproduct of gravitational and magnetic phenomena. From the Electric Universe perspective, the measurement of electric currents in space is the inevitable recognition of the electrical circuitry that connects celestial bodies across interplanetary, interstellar, and intergalactic space. It's essential to remember that electric currents are only visible when they meet regions of dust and gas, where one sees the unmistakable filamentary structure of electrified plasma, as in the vast star-forming networks in our own Milky Way. Measuring the strength of cosmic electric currents is, of course, no easy matter for scientists on Earth, and is even vastly more challenging than estimating the strength of cosmic magnetic fields. A good recent example can be found in our own solar system and scientists' investigation of the Saturnian moon Enceladus. As we outlined in a recent Space News, prior to the arrival of the Cassini spacecraft at Saturn over a decade ago, planetary scientists had expected Enceladus to be, quote, geologically dead. Instead, they found explosive filamentary jets shooting material at tremendous velocities up to hundreds of kilometers from the moon's surface. Adding to the surprise, the jets were seen at the moon's south pole, the last place they expected such activity. As reported by Space.com in 2005, the finding flipped everything scientists knew about Enceladus on its head, because what should have been a dead moon appeared to be geologically active, and what was supposed to be the moon's coldest region turned out to be its warmest. Since their discovery, scientists have interpreted the features as so-called ice geysers, which they view as a form of cryovolcanism, probably resulting from Saturn's gravitational forces producing tidal heating within the moon. In 2008, Cassini's plasma spectrometer discovered evidence for electrical currents in the plumes of water and dust. In recent years, a number of papers have been written on the presence of negatively charged dust grains in the so-called plumes. And now, based on data from the Cassini-Langmuir probe, a new scientific paper is providing evidence that these dust grains have actually, quote, blocked the signal of the powerful electrical currents in the Enceladus jets. For a number of years, standard theory has proposed that electrically neutral water molecules are ejected from the moon's surface, where UV rays from the sun and interactions with plasma in Saturn's magnetosphere strips electrons from water molecules, forming positively charged water ions. In theory, these ions are then free to be, quote, picked up and merge with co-rotating plasma, supposedly generating an electric current. Cassini scientists had estimated the strength of the jet's electric currents based on disturbances to Cassini's magnetometer instrument. But as noted in a summary of the new scientific paper in the Journal of Geophysical Research, when Cassini flew through the icy plume, its instruments sent back vastly different readings. According to the craft's Langmuir probe, which measures particle density, there were enough ions present to generate a current of 10 million amps. The magnetometer indicated a current more than 20 times weaker. The authors provide experimental evidence that ions like those in the Enceladus plume are, quote, attracted and trapped within the sheaths of negatively charged dust grains. They conclude that, quote, Cassini's Langmuir probe is measuring the entire ion population, both free and trapped ions, while the Cassini magnetometer detects the magnetic perturbations associated with pickup currents from the smaller population of free ions, with this distinction possibly reconciling the ongoing debate in the literature on the ion density in the plume. Simply put, the results are anomalous for the standard, quote, pickup ions model, but they are expected if the surface of Enceladus is being etched by electrical discharge machining, as our chief science advisor Wal Thornhill has always proposed. Electrical discharge machining works by stripping electrons from high points on a surface. In this process on Enceladus, positive ions generated on the surface are heated by electric discharge and electrostatically attracted to follow the electrons into space. This would in fact explain the high loading of positive ions that the Langmuir probe measured. And as we reported in great detail in a recent space news, the notion that the gravitational influences of the gas giants Jupiter and Saturn produces tidal heating in their respective moons, resulting in cryovolcanism, has never been more questionable in light of new discoveries. As we noted, in 2013, scientists reported that the locations of the so-called volcanic plumes on Io are completely incompatible with the moon's internal heat signatures, a finding which, according to lead author Christopher Hamilton, can't be reconciled with any existing solid-body tidal heating models. Likewise, on Enceladus, in 2016, scientists were amazed to discover that when the so-called geysers on the moon are producing the most water and dust, the accompanying gas output was anomalously low. As reported by Space.com, the researchers expected quite a lot more gas expelled at the far part of Enceladus's orbit to help explain the outpouring of dust, but they found the gas output had bumped up by just 20%, far less than expected. The leader of the study said of the findings, "We had thought the amount of water vapor in the overall plume across the whole south polar area was being strongly affected by tidal forces from Saturn. Instead, we find that the small-scale jets are what's changing. Both scientists' new insights into the strength of the electric currents in the Enceladus plumes and the failure of the tidal heating models to explain discovery are stunning victories for the electrical interpretation of the phenomenon. Of course, given scientists' difficulties in accurately measuring the electric currents at Enceladus, this naturally emphasizes the present technical and observational constraints on quantifying the electromagnetic energies at the vastest cosmic scales. However, as we've reported in many recent episodes, the evidence for cosmic scale electric currents is being more and more routinely presented in mainstream scientific literature. One of the most spectacular electromagnetic phenomena in space is the many light-years-long collimated jets produced at active galactic nuclei. Today, standard astrophysics offers no explanation for the phenomena that does not involve a hypothetical black hole producing tremendous magnetism. However, with increasing regularity, mainstream scientific literature has proposed that the jets are composed of powerful electric currents. From radio astronomers estimating the current in an extragalactic jet, supposedly the equivalent of 1 trillion bolts of lightning, to more recent scientific papers which describe a, quote, battery mechanism close to the hypothetical black hole producing electric currents. As a recent paper by Gabuzda et al. States, astrophysical jets are fundamentally electromagnetic structures. Nevertheless, in every case, astrophysicists can only envision colossal gravity producing magnetic fields, which are somehow primary in the creation of the spectacular, quote, cosmic lightning. A recent Phys.org report describes new findings that can only confound the standard interpretation of so-called black hole jets. As matter is broken down around a black hole, jets of electrons are launched by the magnetic field from either pole of the black hole at almost the speed of light. Astronomers have long been flummoxed by these jets. But this view is not supported by new research into the magnetic field surrounding a, quote, black hole that is believed to be in our own Milky Way, within a microquasar in the constellation Cygnus. The Phys.org report summarizes the findings. The team observed the magnetic field of a black hole within our own galaxy from multiple wavelengths for the first time. They discovered that magnetic fields are much weaker than previously understood, a puzzling finding that calls into question previous models of black hole components. The research shows a deep need for continued studies on some of the most mysterious entities in space. However, the real deep need may be for astrophysicists to finally consider actual theoretical alternatives to the black hole's existence. As stated many times by physicist Wal Thornhill, what these increasingly problematic discoveries highlight is the problem of over-specialization in the sciences, far removed from the spotlight of popular science. For decades, plasma cosmologists have presented experimental evidence that the spectacular electromagnetic phenomena that space scientists attribute to black holes is in fact a high-density energy storage phenomenon demonstrated in laboratories, called a plasmoid. In several episodes, we have briefly described how a plasmoid is a kind of load in a galactic electrical circuit, concentrating and storing energy. When a plasmoid reaches a threshold density, it will discharge, usually along a galaxy's spin axis, producing the stupendous galactic jets whose electric currents are now increasingly recognized in mainstream scientific literature. All astrophysicists who seek an answer to the mystery of cosmic jets should be acquainted with the experimental research into the plasmoid's applicability to cosmic phenomena. We encourage viewers to consider the landmark research of the scientific pioneer, the late physicist and MIT scientist Winston H. Bostick, whose experimental research on the plasmoid led to the development of the dense plasma focus device. Bostick simulated many astrophysical phenomena through plasma physics experiments, including galaxy formation and spectacular cosmic jets. The jet's collimation over tremendous cosmic distances, the knotted structures seen in many jets, their nearly light-speed velocity, their emissions of synchrotron radiation, and now the inferred measurements of electric currents in the jets are all the predictable features of a discharging galactic plasmoid. Since the plasmoid's jets are part of a vastly larger electrical circuit, this can also resolve an enduring, intractable problem for astrophysicists. which is the mysterious source of the energy to the most distant parts of the cosmic jets, sometimes over many hundreds of thousands of light years. Occam's razor states, the simplest explanation is the most likely. Standard astrophysics tells us that electric currents in space are the product of extremely complex and strange gravitational and magnetic processes. The electric universe states that electric currents flow through the conductive medium of plasma, which composes more than 99% of the visible universe. Celestial bodies moving in electrified environments are electromagnetically connected and will discharge electrically when experiencing dramatic voltage spikes, as we see on our own planet in the form of spectacular blue jets, elves, and red sprites above the clouds reaching towards space. Electric currents in space mean only one thing: we live in an electric universe. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In recent years, a profound development has been unfolding in astrophysics: the inevitable acknowledgement of tremendous electric currents at the largest cosmic scales. One of the most stupendous electromagnetic cosmic phenomena is the collimated, light-years-long jets produced at active galactic nuclei. Recently, the obvious electrical nature of these jets has been explored in scientific papers, published in peer-reviewed journals. One such paper, entitled "The Jets of Active Galactic Nuclei as Giant Coaxial Cables," summarizes, "Our results have now yielded firm evidence that many, possibly all, active galactic nuclei jets have inward currents along their axes, and outward currents in more extended regions surrounding the jets." It also indicates that astrophysical jets are fundamentally electromagnetic structures. Another paper, entitled "Electric Currents Along Astrophysical Jets," also argues for cosmic scale electric currents, though also doing so from the framework of gravitational theory. The author states, "Several researchers have reported direct evidence for large-scale electric currents along astrophysical jets. Quite unexpectedly, their directions are not random, as would have been the case if the magnetic field were generated by a magnetohydrodynamic dynamo. Instead, in all kiloparsec scale detections, the inferred electric currents are found to flow away from the galactic nucleus. This unexpected break of symmetry suggests that a battery mechanism is operating around the central black hole." And here we see emphasized the fundamental differences between standard astrophysical theory and plasma cosmology and the electric universe. Astrophysicists can only imagine colossal gravity, a black hole, producing tremendous magnetism, which then produces the stupendous electric currents. In this episode, retired professor of electrical engineering Donald Scott offers the electric universe interpretation, first addressing a basic problem in cosmology: what is the real source of magnetism in space?
We have to realize that magnetic fields are caused by one thing and one thing only, and that's the movement of charge. In other words, electric currents. Electric currents create magnetic fields, and when magnetic fields collide with conductors, then currents will be induced, that is to say initiated, created in those conductors. You can't have one without the other. But anyway, they've been very reluctant to mention electric currents until very, very recently, where they do indeed mention electric currents. So one was electric currents along astrophysical jets by Ioannis Kontopoulos. When I saw this, we were all like, wow, electric currents in jets, that sounds just like Birkeland currents. Until you begin to read the article, and I do admit they do mention electric currents, so that's 2 points to windward, and that's good. But I think it's the first sentence in the article. Astrophysical black holes and their surrounding accretion disks are believed to be threaded by grand design helical magnetic fields There is strong theoretical evidence. Now, I don't know what strong theoretical evidence means. There's either strong observational evidence or a well-believed theory, but there's no such thing as strong theoretical evidence. But the main driver of their winds and jets is the Lorentz force generated by these fields and their associated electric currents. So that's good. The Lorentz forces certainly are at play in Birkeland currents. Then they go on, they said several researchers have reported direct evidence for large-scale electric currents along astrophysical jets. Good. Quite unexpectedly, their directions are not random, as would have been the case if the magnetic field were generated by a magnetohydrodynamic dynamo. Uh-oh. There we go again, dynamos. If you look up the definition of dynamo in Wikipedia, and I did it just to be sure I was right, a dynamo is an electrical generator that produces direct current. In other words, it's a DC generator. It's the way Edison made DC current in Chicago, I think it was. But it has nothing to do really with what's going on in space. I don't think we really have any use for dynamos, but they use this word almost like a magic shibboleth that it's a dynamo caused it. Anyway, magnetic fields are an important constituent of cosmic plasmas at all astrophysical scales. They are thought to be produced by seed fields generated by random currents that are amplified by dynamo action in planetary and stellar interiors, accretion disks, and generally rotating astrophysical plasmas. I mean, other than the fact that they mention astrophysical plasma, everything there is wrong or non-existent. There's no such thing as an accretion disk. They like to think about it. It's well known that Tony Peratt said that in Los Alamos laboratory, they would try to simulate an accretion disk and totally failed miserably. They couldn't do it. And if they mixed plasma in with their simulation and allowed for Maxwell's equations to be used as well, then yes, you could get the thing to accrete. But without plasma, without electricity, there's no such thing as a magnetic accretion disk. But anyway, there's another paper which I think is less obviously wrong in many of its points, but still has some things to worry about. That one is the jets of AGNs, active galactic nuclei, as giant coaxial cables. This paper was written by Denise Gabuzda and her associate authors Nagel and Roach from the Department of Physics at University College, Cork, Ireland. And the first sentence in that paper is, active galactic nuclei, AGNs, release vast amounts of energy, whose ultimate source is a supermassive black hole in the galactic nucleus, in so-called radio-loud AGNs. Remember that radio-loud. That's important. Radio-loud AGNs, two relativistic jets of plasma emanate from the nucleus, presumably along the rotational axis of the black hole. In other words, they can't let go of black holes and gravity and all this other nonsense when they make loud radio noise. Answer, double layers. That's been well known for decades, since Hannes Alfvén won the Nobel Prize in 1970. Let me just conclude by saying, in the end of that paper by Gabuzda, her figure 2 is almost an identical figure to one that I published in my paper in Progress in Physics in 2015. It's a cross-section of the Birkeland current. It shows counter-rotating currents and magnetic fields, and that's indeed true. So if she gets it that right, why can't she let go of the supermassive black holes? There's no excuse for anyone with any claim to being an investigator of cosmic phenomena not to know about the seminal plasma work of people like C.E.R. Bruce, Ralph Jurgens, Earl Milton, Wal Thornhill, Tony Peratt, Hannes Alfvén, Birkeland, and many others. These people have staked out their rightful claims years ago, and it's shameful that their work is being ignored as if they never had lived and worked for years to promote these concepts.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.
Hey, what's up, my friend Calican?
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In a recent Space News episode, Thunderbolt's colleague, physicist Eugene Bagashov, offered his analysis of what is thought to be the first ever observed interstellar asteroid. Brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. The Saturnian moon Enceladus may be one of the most enigmatic bodies in the solar system. For nearly a decade, since the first close flyby of the Cassini space probe, NASA scientists have faced a series of puzzles that continue to challenge conventional theory. The electrical nature of these puzzling phenomena has grown increasingly evident, leading to the 2012 NASA report, Enceladus Plume is a new kind of plasma laboratory. In part one of this two-part presentation, we explore the question, what makes Enceladus such a unique and fascinating case study in planetary science?
Enceladus is a moon of Saturn, orbits just outside the rings. It has one of the most perfect orbits of any moon in the solar system. It's almost a perfect circle. One of its faces always points towards Saturn as it moves around in its orbit. It's almost perfectly aligned in the equatorial plane of Saturn. And what all that means is that the gravity forces acting on it are almost zero. It's almost as if it were sitting still, because all the variations caused by an eccentric orbit or an inclined orbit or a rotation other than synchronous have been zeroed out. So Enceladus makes an almost perfect laboratory in space. Saturn only receives 1% of the sunlight that the Earth gets. Enceladus, in turn, is the most reflective object in the solar system. So of that 1% of the light that Earth gets, less than 1% of that even can heat that little moon. So it isn't being heated by the sun. So that can't be much of a factor for the things we see on this little moon.
Since 2005, NASA scientists have known that Enceladus emits unexpected jets of icy material. Adding further surprise, the jets were found near the South Pole, which NASA scientists had expected to be the moon's coldest region, but which instead turned out to be its warmest. Adding further astonishment, in 2009, Cassini scientists discovered the presence of electrically charged particles in the Enceladus plumes. What can these jets tell us about the obvious electrical environment of Enceladus?
One of the features of Enceladus that is so intriguing are these jets we see coming off of it. They were first discovered back in 2005 when Cassini arrived at Saturn and began looking at the different moons. They didn't announce it until November 2005 because they weren't really sure what they were seeing. But by now it's become perfectly clear that jets of finely divided water particles are coming off of this moon almost continuously. And the main area they come from is the southern region, where there are these 4 parallel bands called tiger stripes, over 100 kilometers long and separated from each other by several tens of kilometers and slightly discolored. And they call them geysers or cryovolcanoes because they cannot imagine any other mechanism that would produce such a feature. But because Enceladus is so perfect in its orbit and there's no heat sources coming into it and there's not enough energy from cosmic rays to power it, the only source of energy for these geysers, as they call them, would have to come from within Enceladus itself. But this little moon is only about 300 miles across. It's a small little ball of ice out in the middle of nowhere. Its surface temperature is lower than the boiling point of nitrogen. It's about 72 degrees above absolute zero. And so the water ice that composes at least its outer layers would be as hard as steel and colder than anything we would care to touch. So anything that would heat up inside of it, the ice would want to conduct that heat away before it could ever get more than a few degrees above the boiling point of liquid nitrogen. So the heat conduction problem is one of many problems with the geyser theory. But another problem is that if it were water being heated up and launched off of Enceladus, that's actually a description of how a rocket engine works. So if Enceladus has geysers, then Enceladus has its own onboard rocket engines. And those rocket engines, no matter how tiny their thrust, would be moving it in its orbit. It would be distorting it in some fashion, either in eccentricity, which is nearly circular, or in inclination, or in major axis, either making it come closer to Saturn or move further away. And we don't see any of that happening. And if it were a heat source now, it would have been a bigger heat source in the past if it was radioactive or chemical. And so these rocket engines would have been even more powerful. And so the idea that Enceladus could end up in this perfectly circular orbit is statistically just about impossible. These engines firing off more or less in random directions would be doing something to disturb that orbit. So they're really at a loss to explain how an internal heat source could be causing these jets to be escaping from Enceladus and not disturbing its orbit. It's a series of scientific problems, a chain that's with every link is very, very speculative and weak. And that's why we in the electric universe don't think these are geysers at all.
In 2011, NASA scientists found that the heat output in Enceladus's south polar region is more than an order of magnitude higher than their models had predicted.
NASA scientists recently determined by calculation that the power levels involved are something like around 15 gigawatts. And that would be like about, at least a dozen nuclear power plants worth of power being generated in these jets coming off of Enceladus. Well, that's quite a bit of power for a moon that has no evident external heat source, and it appears to be composed of ice at a temperature of liquid nitrogen. So where could such power be coming from? Well, if such power is coming from within, and if such power is generated radioactively, which is what their main theory is, that means that inside Enceladus are more than 12 nuclear power plants worth of radioactive decay. We haven't even found such a thing on Earth. So either the power of these jets is coming from within Enceladus, or it is being supplied from elsewhere. This little moon is orbiting Saturn in its magnetic field, which is in turn being fed by power either coming toward the sun or electric power coming from the sun. More likely, Saturn is acting as a cathode in the overall heliocentric circuit that powers the sun. It's intercepting part of that. And in turn, Enceladus is intercepting some tiny, tiny fraction of that. In fact, we have a number, 15 gigawatts, at least for the Tiger Stripe area. The power levels involved in the solar circuit are far more than needed to explain the features on this little moon.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. A recent discovery by astronomers using the Pan-STARRS telescope is challenging many popular ideas about supernovae. The astronomers report having observed what they call a young supernova in an elliptical galaxy where stars are no longer forming. Lead author Nathan Sanders says of the discovery, "This supernova is one of a kind, and it's definitely in the wrong neighborhood." However, countless surprising discoveries in recent years have challenged long-held theories about the very nature of stars. What are we to make of these discoveries in light of this latest astronomical puzzle?
This supernova is in an old elliptical galaxy in a region where there are no stars being born. So this raises some questions at the end of the article. It says, is this a runaway star from another star formation site? Is it a very local bit of star formation? Is it a different way for such a supernova to occur? None of these seems very likely, so we have a real puzzle. Well, the problem stems from the theory of stars themselves. In fact, the models of stars are so complex that they are non-predictive. One wag suggested you could just as easily come up with a koala bear as a star from the complexity of the theory. The other thing is that a supernova explosion is not really understood. It's a very clever model, but it's totally beyond belief. You have a star which suddenly switches off a theoretical engine at the center, its nuclear furnace, and it suddenly implodes. So this requires the switch off to be sudden, and not only that, the implosion then has to rebound to form the explosion. Of course, this kind of model you would expect would form a spherical shell of material racing away from the star. But what do we see when we look at supernovae? Generally, they have an axis along which matter is ejected. So it's not spherical, the explosion. So this is another puzzle. In fact, it was June last year, it was reported that supercomputer models of supernovae failed to explode. All they did was to implode and collapse. So it's not surprising that astronomers are puzzled. This particular supernova shows a high degree of helium, which also is unexpected. So it was even suggested that perhaps this particular supernova was another type which is due to white dwarfs exceeding a certain mass and then exploding. And so they said maybe it was a collision of two white dwarfs, one of which was helium-rich. So you can see these special conditions that are being introduced in order to try and explain this supernova. Now, it's just a couple of years ago that I had published in the IEEE Transactions on Plasma Science my explanation of supernova 1987A, which shows structure. It showed 3 rings which were centered on an axis through the star, and these rings were made of bright beads. The one nearest the star, encircling where the star was, were very bright, and those further away were dimmer. But this kind of structure is just not explained by any theory of an exploding star.
Much of the strange and encumbered reasoning behind the standard supernova theory may be resolved if a supernova is reinterpreted as an electrical discharge.
In the electric universe model of stars, the complex chemistry to produce the heavy elements inside the star is unnecessary in a supernova. The idea is, of course, that there are populations of stars, and the first population of stars exploded and threw all of the heavier elements out into space where they were collected to make the second population of stars. Now, this is a very messy and inefficient way of producing the stars that we see in our own galaxy, for instance. Also, wherever you look, astronomers are finding anomalies in chemical compositions of stars, stars that shouldn't be there. They're the wrong age, the wrong population. Recently, looking at globular clusters, they've been puzzled by the chemical composition of those stars because it was thought they must have all been produced at the same time in the same event, and yet they're finding compositions which don't fit that picture. In the electric universe, all stars produce heavy elements at their surface, in their photospheres, where strong electrical discharge activity is taking place. And of course, on Earth in the laboratory, this is exactly the way we produce isotopes and heavier elements. In the laboratory is by electrical power applied to accelerators. So there's nothing mysterious there. The standard model, on the other hand, requires purely theoretical and untestable things to be going on unseen inside stars. When it comes to a star exploding, the electrical model is simplicity itself, and it doesn't require the star to be of any particular age because in the electrical model, of course, electrical power is supplied to all stars and is the source of their light and heat and the radiation from them. Now, Hans Alfvén pointed out that the circuits in space also include what are called double layers, where charge is separated across a very small region of space. Those double layers can act like a switch, and if that switch is thrown, then the circuit is broken and all of the energy stored in the magnetic fields of that circuit, which can extend far beyond the star into the galaxy itself, is concentrated on that double layer, that switch. And that switch can actually be at the surface of a star. So a supernova explosion is purely an electrical explosion. It's the kind of thing that has been photographed, and you can see on YouTube, when high voltage transmission power lines, the circuit is opened at an inappropriate time, and a huge arc stretches between the two electrodes as they separate. So you could say that what you're looking at in a supernova explosion is the opening of a stellar switch when that star suddenly brightens to the point where it can outshine all of the rest of the stars in that galaxy.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In part 1 of this presentation, physicist Wal Thornhill began his discussion on the electrical nature of stars with an examination of pulsars, electromagnetic pulsing signals in space which astronomers attribute to so-called neutron stars. Today, Thornhill offers an in-depth juxtaposition of the standard theory of stars versus that of the electric universe. As he explains, the evidentiary basis for a radically new view of stars has never been stronger.
Clearly, if neutron stars don't exist, it calls into question the theory of their birth in a supernova explosion. Neutron stars are believed to be the end-of-life remnant for stars 8 to 15 times the mass of the Sun in a supernova explosion. The story goes that heavy elements accumulate in the star's core until nuclear fusion switches off. Without the support of the energy radiating from the inner core, the outer core collapses inwards under gravity and reaches a velocity of up to 23% of the speed of light, and the sudden compression increases the temperature of the inner core up to 100 billion kelvins. The resulting explosion and blast of neutrinos is thought to blow away the original star's hydrogen-rich outer layers, and the remnant of the now super-collapsed core is believed to be a pulsating neutron star, or pulsar. Notice that this incredible scenario implies an understanding that simply doesn't exist of how matter and gravity behaves inside a star. It takes no account of the electrical structure of matter, which renders all conjectures about so-called degenerate matter in white dwarfs with densities of 1 ton per cubic centimetre, and neutron star densities of 1 billion tons per teaspoonful, sheer mathematical fantasy. Plasma scientists have shown that an ordinary stellar body under electrical stress can simply explain pulsars. So if neutron stars don't exist, the obvious next question is, do we understand supernovae? The simple answer is no, and this has serious repercussions for Big Bang cosmology. Space.com reported in February 2006 that the supernova model doesn't work. The problem is that in even the best computer simulations, the shock wave isn't powerful enough on its own to break through the dense layers of superheated gas that envelops the core. In the models, the shock wave stalls as if muffled by a blanket, and the supernova explosion never occurs. But as usual, this finding has had no effect on the firm belief in the story of supernovae. Now we have confirmation that a supernova explosion leaves a normal stellar remnant and not a mythical neutron star. A report in phys.org on November the 8th says, "A star exploded, survived, and exploded again more than 50 years later. It's the celestial equivalent of a horror movie villain, a star that wouldn't stay dead." The finding, published by Nature, completely confounds existing knowledge of a star's end of life. Somehow, this star exploded more than half a century ago, survived, and exploded again in 2014. This supernova breaks everything we thought we knew about how they work, said E.A. Archivi of the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Las Cumbres Observatory. This is another in a long list of discoveries that defy the standard model of how stars work. Standard models in physics have become a tyrannical impediment to scientific progress over the last century. They are taught as facts rather than provisional guesses. In the 21st century, the children's rhyme should be, "Twinkle, twinkle, electric star, scientists don't know what you are." The life and death story of stars is based on the simple assumption that a nuclear furnace hidden in the core of a star progressively fuses hydrogen and some heavier elements over the star's lifetime, changing the star's spectrum and appearance over time. A bright star finally dies with a supernova bang or a white dwarf whimper, depending on the star's size. The story assumes all kinds of things that are beyond normal experience and experimental confirmation. First and foremost is the assumption that Newton's law of gravity works inside a star the same way it does in space. This can't be assumed so long as there is no physical explanation for the force of gravity or how matter exhibits mass and gravity. Arthur Eddington gave us the standard model of the interior of stars in his 1926 publication, The Internal Constitution of the Stars. It was written at the end of the gaslight and horse and buggy era, following the discovery of nuclear energy, which seemed the only way to explain how the sun could shine for the billions of years estimate of the age of the Earth. Eddington dismissed any outside influence in a single sentence. No source of energy is of any avail unless it liberates energy in the deep interior of the star. It's not enough to provide for the external radiation of the star. We must provide for the maintenance of the high internal temperature, without which the star would collapse. Unbelievably, this old hot air balloon model of an isolated star remains unchallenged in the 21st century, while stars are being found that shouldn't exist according to that model. Eddington's model is based on stars imagined as a ball of gas, chiefly hydrogen, held together by gravity while being expanded by radiation pressure from nuclear fusion in the core. Unfortunately for science, the timing of this model was premature. Electric lights were just becoming commonplace, and the study of electric discharges in low-pressure gases was in its infancy. Otherwise, this theoretical blind alley might have been avoided. The damage done by Eddington's influence and his uncritical support of Einstein has been immense in physics, but that's another story. Eddington's mathematics might be correct, but he was deluded in thinking his was a practical model. His stars are inside out, with the lightest element, hydrogen, in the core. His model also requires a radiation zone, unknown in any other hot body, but introduced to break down the lethal radiation from the core to the cool photospheric radiance. Eddington ignored dark sunspots which show the sun to be cooler beneath the bright photosphere. That was later blamed, as usual, on magnetism conveniently generated out of sight inside the star. The standard model of stars is untestable and so complex as to be unfalsifiable, let alone usefully predictive. So new discoveries merely add to the ramshackle Rube Goldberg model. Mysteries and exceptions abound, but the following supernova discovery is a spectacular failure of that model. A bizarre supernova that keeps exploding over and over again and refuses to die is a natural outcome of my electric universe supernova model published in the IEEE Transactions on Plasma Science in 2007. That electrical model has a heavy element core, as normal for any celestial body, and an extensive outer atmosphere of mostly hydrogen and some helium. There is no energy source deep in the star's core producing radiation or capable of blowing the star apart. What we call a star is a plasma discharge in double layers at the top of the star's hot, bloated ionosphere. A supernova explosion occurs when the photospheric double layers explode. Energy stored beyond the star in the galactic circuit then is focused down onto a single hapless star which for a brief time outshines all the stars in the galaxy as a true arc light. Electric arcing between the photosphere and the liquid or solid surface of the star accelerates heavy elements into space, which is where they were recently found, to theorists' great puzzlement, in the outer reaches of the expanding debris. A Phys.org report of March 29, 2012 says, "A star explodes, turns inside out." The study found that most of the iron which, according to theoretical models, was originally on the inside of the star, is now located near the outer edge of the remnant. Surprisingly, there is no evidence from X-ray or infrared observations for iron at the centre of the remnant, where it was formed. Also, much of the silicon and sulfur, as well as the magnesium, is now found towards the outer edges of the still expanding debris. The distribution of the elements indicates that somehow the star turned inside out. So a supernova outburst ejects heavy elements from the star's surface and may leave an ordinary stellar remnant. Certainly there is no neutron star because there is no gravitational collapse. These findings are explained in my peer-reviewed paper, which discards the idea that the energy of a supernova event must come from within the star. It explains the intricate bipolar structure of the much closer and easier to observe supernova 1987A, which is 169,000 light-years away in the Large Magellanic Cloud. It's the same kind of Type II supernova as the so-called death-defying one. There is evidence of external electrical triggering of supernovae, which is shown in the non-random periodic behavior of extragalactic supernovas. An independent researcher, Ella Sanders, in 2003, found a periodicity in multiple supernovae events in galaxies. Such behavior is inexplicable in the conventional view of isolated stars. The plasma cosmologist Anthony Peratt wrote in a communication with Sanders, "In a plasma universe as espoused by Hans Alfvén, periodicity of high-energy density events in the universe is what one expects. The reason for this is that we view the universe as we view the solar system and laboratory plasmas as being filled with current-conducting filaments. As such, energy built up in one part of space can be released hundreds of megaparsecs away by the filamentary transmission lines. This release is usually found either in solar plasmas, auroras, or pulsars to be periodic. Supernovae in the plasma community have been viewed as the release of energy from a galactic dimensional filament with a very plasma-like behavior. This now appears to include periodicity, a predictable apparent timeliness between successive events." End of quote. A supernova explosion is caused by the electrical energy stored over some vast volume in a galactic circuit being focused catastrophically into the photospheric double layer of a star, in the same way we saw the opening circuit breaker spectacularly discharge the transmission line energy in a very small space. The entire star is subjected to arcing down to the surface, far below the photosphere. The arcs accelerate matter from the cool, dense body of the star upward against gravity into space. The intense electrical energy generates the radioactive isotopes seen in the ejecta. That accounts for the prodigious initial lightning-like flash of radiation from a supernova and subsequent slow fading of the ejected matter from the unfortunate star. Supernova 1987A appeared in southern skies in February 1987, the first time in the telescopic age that a naked-eye supernova appeared in our night sky. Its beautiful, complex bipolar configuration defies explanation as the result of an explosion. None of the official explanations make any sense. I gave a detailed explanation of the structure in terms of a plasma Z-pinch on my website in August 2005. The supernova has precisely the same kind of equatorial ring of variable bright knots that were discovered about our own solar system by the IBEX and Cassini missions. However, the high energy of the supernova lit up the star's circuit for us to plainly see. Even more compelling are the fainter, more distant axial rings of supernova 1987A, which are due to polar double layers in the star's circuit, as predicted by Hans Alfvén decades ago. The same beautiful hourglass form is seen about stars at the centre of so-called planetary nebulae. In this example, we see the more diffuse axial rings, and the, quote, bizarre and mysterious alignment of nearby planetary nebulae, unquote, is natural when stars are connected electrically by galactic circuits like beads on a necklace. The most spectacular example of the wiring harness of a star can be seen side-on in the Red Square Nebula, where the polar Birkeland current filaments are electromagnetically pinched at the star to form the X-shaped spokes, and double-layer rings are spaced along the polar axis to form the rungs. It's important to notice that plasma cosmology provides a single mechanism to explain supernovae, pulsars, gamma-ray bursts, and planetary nebulae. The electric universe model of bright stars has them all producing the heavy elements seen in their spectra by a process of non-thermal catalytic nuclear reactions in their electrified photospheres. A bright star's radiant energy is a combination of electrical and nuclear fusion energy. There are lessons here to be learnt by nuclear scientists who have been promising thermonuclear energy, like the Sun, since mid-last century. But first they must understand the Sun and the electrical nature of matter. The heavy elements produced in the photosphere continually rain down on the cool body of the star well below the photosphere. This makes far more sense than having rare supernovae explosions as the sole source of heavy elements, which are then lost into deep space. So exploding stars are the catalyst for exploding theories. In October 2011, I wrote a Nobel Prize for the Dark Side about the prize in physics being awarded to 3 astrophysicists for discovering the accelerating universe. This supposed discovery requires dark energy to make up 73% of the universe. The evidence interpreted in this weird way comes from comparing the redshift distances of galaxies with the brightness of their supernovae, used as a standard candle. It was found that the supernovae in highly redshifted galaxies are fainter than expected, indicating that they are further away than previously estimated. This in turn implied a startling accelerating expansion of the universe, according to the Big Bang model. It's like throwing a ball into the air and having it accelerate upwards. So a mysterious dark energy was invented which fills the vacuum and works against gravity. So much for modern cosmology. Meanwhile, the electric universe recognizes the outstanding astronomer and cosmologist Dr. Halton Arp, who wrote, "The kind of theory we're looking for is simple, capable of being visualized, one that can connect together the puzzling observational facts that presently confound understanding." His extensive telescopic observations showed that highly redshifted quasars are connected umbilically to nearby active galaxies, which means redshift is a measure of youthfulness and not distance from us. Quasars are not at the edge of the visible universe. Arp showed that quasars become brighter, more massive, and their redshift diminishes as they mature and become a companion galaxy. All of these features indicate an increasing energy within the quasar as it develops. So supernovae cannot be used as standard candles because the energy available is lower in a youthful high redshift galaxy. With the redshift distance relationship discredited, we have no Big Bang, no expanding universe, and no accelerating expansion. Hubble took the view to his grave that the Big Bang was not the correct interpretation of his discovery, but that fact is never mentioned. Ironically, the Hubble Space Telescope has been instrumental in proving he was right, but beliefs always trump science. There are none so blind as those who have been taught not to see. So when we read science reports like, "The finding published by Nature completely confounds existing knowledge of a star's end of life," and "This supernova breaks everything we thought we knew about how they work," it seems reasonable to expect that this would focus the minds of experts in many specialties, but it doesn't. As a leading psychologist, Ian McGilchrist, has shown, our education systems reinforce the human response to discordant information, which is to deny it and quickly forget it. That's why big breakthroughs in science have often come from outsiders who have not been taught what's impossible. Electrically exploding stars blow up the Big Bang theory, thermonuclear stars, the life and death story of stars, neutron stars, pulsars and white dwarfs. They support Alfvé's view that compact high-energy outbursts in space are electrical. It also replaces physically impossible black holes with the compact, energy-dense plasmoids proposed by plasma cosmology. It clears the Augean stables of astrophysical theory. It connects together the puzzling observational facts that presently confound understanding. Evidence-based science requires that we really wipe the drawing board clean and without prejudice examine all of the evidence as if we are beginners. That generally requires adventurous individuals rather than institutions. Have a happy and thoughtful New Year.
For continuous updates on
At Kia, we're bringing meaning back to value.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. The picture of the formation, evolution, and death of stars is changing with each new discovery. The electric universe theory has offered predictions for stellar phenomena that have proved far more successful than those of gravity-centric cosmology. Stars do not form in a process of gravitational collapse, but rather they form from the electromagnetic pinch effect along vast filaments of remarkably constant width. Stars are not powered by internal thermonuclear reactions. Rather, the sun is a positively charged electrode at the focus of incoming electrical currents. Stars do not collapse and explode when they, quote, burn up their nuclear fuel. Rather, electric stars have internal charge separation and can relieve electrical stress by fissioning or blowing off charged matter. In fact, the standard theory of a supernova, which has never been shown to work experimentally, has grown more severely challenged with each new discovery. In November of 2017, a paper published in the journal Nature reported the observation of a star that exploded, somehow survived, then exploded again more than half a century later. A Phys.org report describes the discovery as follows. The finding, published by Nature, completely confounds existing knowledge of a star's end of life. Somehow, this star exploded more than half a century ago, survived, and exploded again in 2014. A co-author of the paper stated, "This supernova breaks everything we thought we knew about how they work." In part 1 of this 3-part presentation, the chief science advisor to the Thunderbolts Project, physicist Wal Thornhill, will begin our discussion on the nature of stars with an examination of so-called neutron stars, hypothetical entities which were invented in the 1960s after the unexpected discovery of pulsing electromagnetic emissions in space. But as Thornhill explains, like the standard theory of supernovas, the hypothetical neutron star is a questionable proposition at best.
It was argued in a recent Space News that bizarre whirling neutron star lighthouses are not needed to produce rapidly flashing pulsar signals. Conventionally, neutron stars are believed to be the remnants of a supernova explosion, but supernova explosions are said to be not fully understood, which means keep sending money. So exploding stars are a good place to begin exploding theories. Neutrons are only seen to exist outside an atomic nucleus for a few minutes before they separate into an electron and a proton. So we can't just assume they can be packed closely together to form the bulk of a stable star. Insisting that neutrons exist in atomic nuclei forces an unconvincing nuclear model upon us, with positive charges held together by an ad hoc, strong nuclear force. There appears to be very strong statistical evidence that an atomic nucleus is made up of protons in a rapidly revolving geometric structure where electrons are in sufficient numbers to occupy on average the midpoint between pairs of protons. The attractive force to the closer electron overcomes the powerful repulsive electric force between pairs of protons. This greatly simplifies many subjects in atomic and nuclear physics. So we can forget neutron stars. They don't exist. It's far simpler and more likely to suggest that a normal stellar body subjected to abnormally high electrical stress is the source of the steady flashing signals from pulsars. The disturbing fact is that plasma physicists have shown this both theoretically and experimentally. The electrical model of stars is real evidence-based science. Further support for the electrical model recently came from the discovery of gamma-ray flares coming from the Crab Nebula, which encloses a pulsating supernova remnant only 6,500 light-years away in the constellation Taurus. In Physical Review Letters of November the 24th, there appeared a letter titled Inductive Spikes in the Crab Nebula, A Theory of Gamma-Ray Flares by John Kirk and Gwenaël Giacinti. They report, The detection of powerful gamma-ray flares from the Crab Nebula by the Agile satellite and the Large Area Telescope on the Fermi satellite has provided theorists with three major puzzles. How are particles able to emit synchrotron radiation well above the 100 mega-electron-volts astrophysical upper limit? What is the geometry and location of the source, given that it varies on a time scale of hours, whereas the nebula has a light-crossing time of months? By which mechanism can such a small source achieve a power of only one order of magnitude less than that of the entire nebula? On November 27th, it was reported in more popular fashion in the New Scientist under the banner, "Mysterious Gamma Rays in Crab Nebula Traced to Pulsar Winds." It says, and I quote, "Waves of charged particles slamming into gas and dust may be responsible for unexpected super bright flashes in the Crab Nebula. In 2011, two telescopes observed unusual short-lived gamma-ray bursts in the Crab. These exceeded 100 mega-electron volts, hundreds of times brighter than the nebula's normal emissions. The source of the flashes was a mystery. Some suspected it had to do with the pulsar's magnetic field splitting or becoming knotted as they move away from the star and into surrounding material. Now, new research pins the gamma-ray emissions on charged particles like electrons and positrons that flow from the neutron star at near light speed, like a constant breeze. Here we see the blind spot of astrophysicists toward electrical effects in space. They can't see beyond explosive winds slamming into slow-moving matter and mysterious magnetic fields which are tied in knots and magically cut and reconnected to somehow produce what are clearly electrical effects. What we are not told is that physicists in the 21st century have no physical understanding of the magnetic force, just equations. Magnetic field lines are a graphic representation and not a real thing. Magnetic field lines must always terminate at a magnetic pole. They cannot be disconnected and reconnected in empty space. The only electrical reference in the report is to the gamma-ray energy measured in excess of 100 MeV. This voltage is easily exceeded across a cosmic plasma double layer, which form in a Birkeland current in a stellar or galactic circuit. But astrophysicists don't do circuits in space because they are taught electricity doesn't do anything in space. Back in 1986, the pioneering Nobel Prize-winning plasma cosmologist Hans Alfvén said, "Double layers in space should be classified as a new type of celestial object. It's tentatively suggested that X-ray and gamma-ray bursts may be due to exploding double layers. In solar flares, double layers with voltages of 10 billion volts or even more may occur. And in galactic phenomena, we may have voltages that are several orders of magnitude larger." Alfvén was right. It is the simple mechanism behind all of the mysterious gamma-ray bursts in deep space. He explains further, if the current density is too high, an exploding double layer may be formed. This means that in the plasma a region of high vacuum is produced. The plasma refuses to carry any current at all. At the sudden interruption of the circuit, inductance produces enormous overvoltages which may be destructive. The result is a high-energy flash of X-rays, gamma-rays, of the electromagnetic energy stored in a long-distance 500,000 volt transmission line. A voltage pulse across the opening circuit breaker rises to millions of volts, causing a powerful arc several meters long. That same voltage pulse in the stellar circuit accelerates charged particles to energies capable of generating the observed gamma-ray flashes. It shows how a small source can achieve a power only one order of magnitude less than that of the entire nebula. The astrophysicist's conceptual blind spot is evident when we look at the explanation for the gamma-ray flashes offered by scientists, where they actually describe the exploding double-layer effect without recognizing the electrical cause. New research pins the gamma-ray emissions on charged particles like electrons and positrons that flow from the neutron star at near light speed, like a constant breeze. We propose that at some moments you have pockets inside this wind where the density of electrons and positrons drops, says Gwenaël Giacinti at the Max Planck Institute for Nuclear Physics in Heidelberg, Germany. Lines of electromagnetic force usually maintain a constant current. When they encounter these lower density pockets, that current is disrupted. some of the energy in the particles gets converted into kinetic energy, causing the electrons and positrons to accelerate and smash into the nebula's gas and dust. The effect is similar to the behavior of a circuit containing an inductor. Should the current in the circuit suddenly drop, the inductor, which acts to smooth out the electric current, will try to rapidly counteract the loss with a huge pulse, often resulting in a spark. The effect is not similar, it is precisely that of an exploding double layer. As for the wind, with its pockets and lines of electromagnetic force maintaining a constant current, the concepts are adrift from any real physical model involving electricity supplied by a galactic circuit. Instead, the Crab Nebula is treated as an isolated, closed system, so the descriptive words are either misleading or meaningless. Of course, there's no reference in the paper to Hans Alfvén and his 31-year-old explanation for high-energy gamma-ray bursts based on the tried and tested physics of electrified plasma.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. On this series, we have explored the significance of the filamentary structures seen at all scales throughout the cosmos. From the streaming filaments seen in the ion tails of comets, to the giant snake-like filaments reaching from the surface of the sun to the dark cores of sunspots, to the stupendous filamentary networks intimately linked to star formation in the Milky Way galaxy, to the web-like filaments along which galaxies form, like pearls on a string. Filaments in space are the expected features of a universe where electric currents connect celestial bodies across cosmic distances. Electrical circuitry pervades interplanetary, interstellar, and even intergalactic space, which can be seen when electric currents meet regions of dusty plasma and pinch the material into visible filaments. It's therefore no surprise that the discovery of huge filaments in space continues to send mainstream scientists searching for answers. Recently, astrophysicists using the Very Large Array Telescope have made what for them is a completely unexpected discovery near the center of the Milky Way galaxy. What they have found is a nearly 2.5 light-year-long filament that is, quote, probing the hypothetical black hole at Sagittarius A. The December 20, 2017 Phys.org report describes the discovery as follows. The center of our galaxy has been intensely studied for many years, but it still harbors surprises for scientists. A snake-like structure lurking near our galaxy's supermassive black hole is the latest discovery to tantalize astronomers. The leader of a study on the discovery stated, "With our improved image, we can now follow this filament much closer to the galaxy's central black hole, and it is now close enough to indicate to us that it must originate there. However, we still have more work to do to find out what the true nature of this filament is." The investigators are only considering 3 possibilities to explain the mysterious filament. One is that the hypothetical black hole, quote, kicked away high-speed particles, somehow forming the light-years-long filament. This would involve the black hole's rotation pairing with spiraling gas to produce an incredibly powerful magnetic field. Another possibility they've entertained is that the filament is a mathematical conjecture called a cosmic string, which theoretical physicists have proposed may have formed in the early universe, but which have never been discovered. Ironically, as described in the Phys.org report, it's believed that hypothetical cosmic strings are, quote, long, extremely thin objects that carry mass and electric currents. The final notion the scientists have considered is that the alignment of the filament with the galactic center is coincidence. However, as the Phys.org report states, such a coincidence is quite unlikely to happen by chance. Unfortunately, the investigators are not considering other, more promising possibilities, namely that the hypothetical black hole at the galactic center simply does not exist. As we noted in the recent episode, Black Holes Behaving Badly, in astrophysics today, the black hole has become an unfalsifiable concept. In our own Milky Way, it appears that no discovery, including the recent observation of star formation occurring much too close to the hypothetical black hole, where tidal forces must rip the gas and dust apart before it can form stars, will force any doubt of the black hole's existence. As we've outlined many times, the position of plasma cosmology and the electric universe is that it is not a black hole at the center of galaxies, but an ultra-high-density energy storage phenomenon demonstrated for decades in laboratories called a plasmoid, which is a kind of load in the galactic electrical circuit. The plasmoid concentrates and stores energy and is connected to a larger network of electric currents. When the plasmoid reaches a threshold density, it discharges, usually along a galaxy's spin axis. This is in fact the source of stupendous galactic jets. The discovery of a vast filament such as that recently observed is expected and is in fact required if it is a plasmoid at the galactic core. As we've noted several times recently, the role of magnetic fields in sustaining cosmic filaments is now being discussed with increasing frequency in astrophysics. Earlier this year, scientists reported the first ever measurement of the, quote, magnetic bridge linking the Milky Way's two nearest galaxies. Known as the Magellanic Bridge, the filament stretches for approximately 75,000 light-years, connecting the large and small Magellanic Clouds. One of the researchers stated, "Not only are entire galaxies magnetic, but the faint, delicate threads joining galaxies are magnetic too. Everywhere we look in the sky, we find magnetism." The lead author of the study stated, "In general, we don't know how such vast magnetic fields are generated, nor how these large-scale magnetic fields affect galaxy formation and evolution. Understanding the role that magnetic fields play in the evolution of galaxies and their environment is a fundamental question in astronomy that remains to be answered." But of course, magnetism is only a part of the story and will always remain mysterious without the recognition of the electric currents required to produce and sustain the magnetic fields. However, we do see increasing signs that this inevitable recognition is beginning to occur. The December 25, 2017 issue of Astronomy and Astrophysics published the paper, "The Jets of Active Galactic Nuclei as Giant Coaxial Cables." In looking at the properties of stupendous parsec-scale jets, the authors conclude that, quote, "Our results have now yielded firm evidence that many, possibly all, active galactic nuclei jets have inward currents along their axes and outward currents in a more extended region surrounding the jets. It also indicates that astrophysical jets are fundamentally electromagnetic structures, which must be borne in mind when interpreting observed features in the distributions of both their intensity and linear polarization." We note the counter-rotating magnetic fields the authors depict in this diagram of the jet's environment. As those in the electric universe community are well aware, the counter-rotation has special significance. In recent years, Dr. Donald Scott has developed the mathematical modeling of a Birkeland current, whose influence can be seen visually in the form of counter-rotating shells, as observed in Earth's cylindrical auroral sheets and at the north poles of the gas giants Saturn and Jupiter. Dr. Scott will discuss the role of Birkeland currents in galactic jets in a forthcoming Space News. Another scientific paper, published in October 2017, also proposes that giant electric currents flow through the galactic jets. The authors state, "Several researchers have reported direct evidence for large-scale electric currents along astrophysical jets. Quite unexpectedly, their directions are not random, as would have been the case if the magnetic field were generated by a magnetohydrodynamic dynamo. Instead, in all kiloparsec scale detections, the inferred electric currents are found to flow away from the galactic nucleus. This unexpected break of symmetry suggests that a battery mechanism is operating around the central black hole." However, we again note the futility of scientists looking to colossal gravity as the cause of stupendous electromagnetic cosmic phenomena. The question is, what can any so-called battery do that is not connected to a circuit? The central object in an active galactic nucleus must be an electromagnetic energy storage circuit element. the aforementioned plasmoid, in a far grander galactic and extragalactic circuit. Plasma cosmologists recognized this decades ago, and was explained accessibly in the book The Big Bang Never Happened. Yet these concepts are nowhere to be found in mainstream astrophysics, leaving working scientists to ponder undeniable electrical phenomena, with little hope of resolving the underlying cause. And so as we enter the new year of 2018, our basis at the Thunderbolts Project for optimism and confidence has never been stronger, as groundbreaking discoveries lead scientists closer to our electric universe. For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info. Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In part 1 of this presentation, Thunderbolts colleague Andrew Hall began exploring some of the best case studies of electrical scarring on planet Earth. The features don't seem to fit with any standard geological process, but as Hall explained, they do show the expected characteristics produced by electrical discharges. Today, Hall continues his presentation with a focus on the stunning geology in the American Southwest.
In part 1 of Lightning Scarred Earth, Shiprock was presented as an example of a pinnacle created by lightning. Fulgurites are created when lightning strikes, and current penetrates the ground, leaving a hollow tube of glassy, fused material behind. Current from the lightning vaporizes and extracts material in its path, while its heat vitrifies the surrounding soil, leaving behind glassy tubes. Based on its features, it's proposed here that Shiprock is a standing fulgurite, created by lightning so powerful and sustained that the material began to recombine in the current as it was pulled from the ground, leaving behind a pinnacle of fused material instead of a hollow tube. Once material recombines, it's no longer charged and attracted to the lightning channel, so is left behind, its ionic makeup altered by the current and heat. The morphology of Shiprock displays this very well, with columns of fused rock surrounding an inner core of minette, ionically altered material pulled from the ground by the flow of current. Surrounding the pinnacle are minette dikes radiating away in a star pattern. Minette is high in potassium and low in silica content. It contains high volumes of orthoclase and biotite. Both are minerals with high metal content such as potassium, iron, and sodium. Silica dioxide will readily exchange oxygen with metals such as those found in the orthoclase and biotites when sufficient heat is applied. The prevalence of potassium and other metals crystallize in minette, and its undersaturation of silica is evidence of the reduction taking place as it was formed. This suggests that the lightning forming it was positive lightning, which is the type of powerful lightning seen striking from the stratospheric anvil clouds in thunderstorms. Electrons and negative ions in the ground, pulled out by the positively charged lightning, left behind a concentration of positively charged material which was not attracted and drawn away. The dikes and inner core of the pinnacle show the path of the current being drawn to the lightning discharge. Following the lightning strike that formed the pinnacle, the area was left with a net positive charge, which attracted a secondary ground discharge, or arc blast, that emanated from a different discharge process. This secondary discharge will be explored more in the future, but it's worth mentioning now because it left a magnificent Lichtenberg pattern across the ground, unique to the area immediately surrounding Shiprock. The next series of images show the evolution and magnitude of this type of formation. These are all examples from the Four Corners region in northern Arizona. First, when lightning similar in magnitude to what we see today strikes the ground, it sweeps surrounding surface sand to it, drawing it to the lightning channel and creating a shallow crater. Examples of this were shown in Part 1, where lightning created small craters with a pile of sand left behind in a small cone. Again, these are not anthills, although they could easily be mistaken for them on cursory examination. There are no ants, no opening in the mound, and it's dusted over the top with sand fused into pebbles. The pebbles rest in a thin layer over the top like sprinkles on an ice cream cone, and beneath it is powder-fine sand. The top layer was formed from sand pulled into the lightning channel and fused into pebbles by heat, then dropped back on top of the mound when the flame extinguished. They bear the same character as the Minette material in Shiprock Center and dike formations. All of the mound material and surrounding sand measures high in pH. The following images show buttes at various stages of growth. The first exhibits an upwelling of Minette. The second and third images show the broken remains of the sheath, and the last image shows the dark Minette partially surrounded by the lighter rock sheath. Another type of lightning-formed butte has a different morphology that appears to be created by negative cloud-to-ground lightning, the type of lightning that emanates from the belly of a thunderstorm. Because the Earth is generally a negatively charged body, at least in terms of ground charge, it forms a double layer at the interface with the atmosphere. When a thunderstorm forms and the electric field strengthens, positively charged ions in the atmospheric zone of the double layer collect above the ground beneath the storm. Before negative cloud-to-ground lightning strikes, it pulls this material into positive ionic streamers that reach up to connect with the electron avalanche produced by the cloud. When the streamer and avalanche leader connect, a circuit is completed and current discharges through the channel, electrons flowing to ground and positive ions flowing to the clouds. The magnetic field created by the current wraps tightly around the channel, compressing it to a narrow path in what is known as a Z-pinch. Z-pinch has been demonstrated in the lab by simply passing current through an aluminum can with the electrodes connected at the top and bottom. The resulting pinch crushes the can into an hourglass shape. In the huge primordial storms that we theorize occurred in Earth's past, such lightning and pinch effects resulted in huge amounts of positive ionic material being swept to the lightning channel with such extreme force it sometimes created supersonic winds. Fulgamites, formed by sustained giant cloud-to-ground arcs, display the effects of discharging current, accumulation of ionic dust, Z-pinch, and the supersonic winds and shock waves they produced. The images presented show the progression of such an event. First, the strike forms a raised platform with a shallow crater in the center where the lightning created an electrode spot. The rim of the crater is material swept inward by ionic winds and fused. There is a road cutting through the crater in the first image to give some perspective of how large this feature is. These images are from Arizona near Pastora Mountain in the Four Corners region. A more sustained strike begins to accumulate neutralizing material on the spot, forming a flat-top dome like a pancake. As the material accumulates, the pancake grows to a mesa-type structure held together in a round form by the magnetic pinch. In the next phase of growth, the mesa grows taller and the inflow winds begin to reach Mach speeds, creating shock waves that mold the rim material into triangular standing waveforms. A detailed discussion of this shock wave and the triangular buttress formations they create is presented more fully in previous articles on arc blast. As neutralized material builds, the anode spot the lightning connects with is at the top of the mesa and rises with it. The strength of the pitch narrows the top, forming a cone, and new regions of wind-blown, fused, and shock-shaped buttresses form rims outside the older rim. The difference between lightning-formed pinnacles like Shiprock and the broad mountain forms shown in these images seems to be polarity in the lightning. This interpretation is preliminary, but it appears that positive lightning burrows into the ground to connect with negative ionic matter beneath the surface, whereas negative lightning attracts surface winds and dust to it to build a mountain. Positive lightning raises a narrow pinnacle of negatively charged material that boils up from the ground with dikes which display the current path through the subsurface. Not much material is drawn to it from the surroundings, except for the sheath of rock it forms around it. Negative lightning connects with pools and streamers of positively charged matter at the surface and pulls huge amounts of airborne dust to create a dome with hardened, buttressed rims. In both cases, mountains can form around them due to ambient winds and blowing dust. Positive arc fulgamites can form monoclines along the dikes if ambient supersonic winds strike them to create a standing wave, where dust piles in long linear ranges of triangular waveforms. The last image above, taken at Comb Ridge Monocline in northern Arizona, shows where fulgamites and dikes are exposed in a monocline. These protrusions create a shock wave and Mach-speed ambient winds that formed a linear standing wave, against which the monocline was formed, like a dune, as blowing dust accumulated. There are several monoclines on the Colorado Plateau that exhibit the same or similar features. Negative arc fulgamites create their own winds, bringing dust to pile against them from all directions, and if powerful enough, form standing shock waves that generate buttresses and a ring around the base. The circular craters and mesas in the images were formed by lightning, while the mountain was expanded by wind-borne dust accumulating around them. There are several examples of mountains with these features in the Four Corners region. Mountains are a misunderstood feature of the planet. Geological concepts are based on rocks forming deep in Earth's crust and being exposed by erosion and tectonic motions, entailing, of course, hundreds of millions of years. It's a very complex process that is not and cannot be witnessed or confirmed by experiment. Mountain formation by wind and electric discharge, however, can be witnessed in nature. Sand dunes are a prime example. Mountains can also be produced in laboratories. So can rock. It happens when slag is produced from welding, ore and metal processing, or from chemical reactions like cement. Atomic and electrolyte bonding is an electrical process, the exchange and sharing of electrons. Electricity and wind is a far more plausible mechanism for mountain building than what is proposed by the consensus theories, especially since the action of wind and lightning that form mountains on the earth can be seen in any thunderstorm. One only needs to extrapolate the forces and energies involved to what they would have been when Earth was in a much larger, stronger electrical environment. Amplify the electric field of a thunderstorm by orders of magnitude, and it will produce an ionized atmosphere, screaming with supersonic winds, ionized dust, and incredible discharges of lightning that dwarf what we experience today. For examples, we need only to look at our neighboring planets. These conditions exist on Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus. Why would Earth be any different? Thank you.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe, stay tuned to thunderbolts.info.
is the end.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. The surfaces of the rocky bodies in our solar system testify to events that planetary scientists have never considered. The interpretive manual of standard geology, limited to processes such as random impacts, wind and water erosion, and volcanism, has never successfully explained countless of the features we see on rocky planets. For decades, experiments with electrical discharges in the laboratory have reproduced some of the most puzzling craters and other features seen on planets and moons. Within the Electric Universe community, a growing number of inquirers are exploring the surface of our planet, identifying the indelible marks left by high-energy electrical discharges. In this episode, Thunderbolt's colleague Andy Hall continues his remarkable series of presentations with his two-part exploration of the lightning-scarred Earth.
The blue-white arc of a lightning bolt stuns the senses. Blinding radiance, elemental beauty, awesome power, and primordial danger flash into existence from thin air and vanish before the mind catches up. We stare, immobile, unthinking, and awestruck. In that moment, a channel of air the diameter of a quarter heats 50,000 degrees as trillions of electrons cascade to Earth. The volume of air blows up, radiating energy across the spectrum and sending sonic booms across the sky. Lightning also pummels the land, creating pressure waves exceeding 70,000 atmospheres. That's 1 million psi. It can create a layer of shock quartz and vitrify surrounding rock into glass. Lightning is an interaction between the earth and sky. It causes an electric field between the electric storm above and the ground beneath our feet. Ground, in this case, is also a technical term, meaning the ambient voltage potential of the soil. Earth is a negatively charged body in space, and current flows up from ground to atmosphere, normally in a drift of ions and electrons that is invisible. Storms reverse this current flow, causing electrons to avalanche back to Earth. The Earth and sky are part of a circuit. Storms result from capacitance in this circuit. The atmosphere stores energy in the form of ionic charge and releases it through lightning, among other effects. The ground is one plate of the capacitor where positive charge collects. As negative charge builds in the cloud, it is repulsed from the ground below, and positive ions are drawn in. The ground reaches up with plasma tendrils. They collect especially around tall structures, pooling densely at start projections, surrounding them with a halo of charge the cascading electrons target for connection. When connection is made, the arc touches Earth, spreading current in horizontal arcs across the surface as much as 20 meters away. This is a death zone. If you're in it, you're a part of a 200,000 amp circuit. The horizontal arcing is a side flash, a scatter of arc tendrils that follow surface conduction across the ground, radially away from the point of impact. The ground potential, type, and shape of surface influences the character of the side flash. Dry sand acquires charge very easily, and so lightning attracts charged particles and will sweep sand to it, leaving a display of the entire strike zone. Sand in the strike zone, where current surges across the surface, pulls inward, leaving a shallow crater with a cone of sand in the center. It's like grabbing a bedspread in the center, pulling it up, and dropping it in a pile. The following photos were taken near Kayenta, Arizona, on desert plains to the south of Cone Ridge. The form is like an anthill, but these are not anthills. Ants dig rocks from below ground and pile it outside the hole. These are built just the opposite. The sand is swept up from the surroundings, leaving a pile at the center of a crater. Besides, these don't have ants or ant holes. The mounds of sand are composed of fine, almost powder sand, but the tops of the mounds are dusted with pebbles. The pebbles are sand that was drawn into the lightning channel and fused before falling back to Earth when the flame extinguished, falling to cover the mound like candy sprinkles on an ice cream cone. Nothing grows inside the craters or on the mounds. It's as if the soil is sterilized. pH tests show the soil to be highly alkaline. What meager growth there is are low ground-covering grasses and weeds around the perimeter of the craters. The desert in this region of northern Arizona is carpeted with lightning strikes that left crater and mound features like these. The land is on the Colorado Plateau just south of Monument Valley. They form what some call fairy rings when seen from the air. The next images show clusters of them. The craters vary in size from 15 to 30 feet in diameter or larger. The size of the central cone is proportionate to the size of the crater, ranging from about 8 to 18 inches tall. The strikes especially cluster where black rock crusts over the sand. The lightning seems to have punched through, scattering rock and leaving the craters bare where nothing grows. Whether the lightning is attracted to the rock or the rock was made with the lightning isn't known, but the rock provides a clue. It appears the lightning came in a coherent event that peppered the land, punching through and shattering the rock. That at least is how it appears. It's as if there were two events, one that torched and melted the surface of the land, creating the cap rock, and a subsequent one that shattered the rock with lightning. What amazes is the number of them clustered in particular areas. They rarely overlap, spaced fairly even, but randomly apart. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them scarring the land just south of Comb Ridge. There are regions around the world where features like these carpet the land for hundreds of square miles. They are seen in desert lands especially, since there is little undergrowth to obscure them. The next image is from Namibia. Here the features connect with filaments of stream beds, but note how they connect in linear arrays and branch radially like little stars. They are electric discharge patterns. Each feature seems to be a shallow basin or spring where water collects. Map resolution doesn't allow better detail, but these features are larger than the Arizona features. Many cover several acres. Much of the country of Uzbekistan is also carpeted with similar features, as the following images from a small portion of eastern Uzbekistan show. The Uzbekistan features are larger and more numerous still. They also appear to be shallow basins where the geology is distinctly changed and there appears to be a source of water. In the last image, there appears to be a home or a ranch with a livestock tank, well, or catchment at the center. It makes sense that water is found where lightning is struck. Subsurface water is a source of ionization that intensifies charge density and therefore the electric field, attracting lightning to its location. Standing surface water won't do that because ions have no point to collect. They spread evenly over the surface of the water. But subterranean water is trapped in the earth where ions can collect and build concentration, locally intensifying the electric field. Pits, craters, and rills formed by lightning leave depressions over aquifers that are natural for springs and wells. But what about larger features, bigger than pits and piles of sand? Can lightning make a mountain? Volcanoes form mountains by extruding molten rock to the surface from hot pools of magma beneath the crust. This is conventional understanding, and it isn't in dispute in the electric universe. After all, volcanoes can be witnessed doing this in real time. The resulting stratovolcanoes, cinder cones, lava flows, ash deposits, and lahars are seen across the globe. What creates magma chambers and causes them to erupt is not understood. Consensus science has a number of speculative theories based on conventional beliefs about the makeup and dynamics of the interior of the Earth. It's these theories EU has a problem with. EU theory proposes the mechanism for heating and erupting volcanoes is electrical discharge beneath Earth's crust. But our theories are also speculative because there is no way to look inside the Earth to be sure. One type of geologic feature attributed to volcanism can be challenged by EU theory, however. These are buttes believed by the consensus to be the ancient throats of volcanoes, where a magma plug froze in the throat and later erosion exposed them, leaving a hardened pinnacle. Archetypical of these is Shiprock, a tall butte that lies near Four Corners, where the U.S. states of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico meet. It lies in the heart of Navajo lands. Some Navajo traditionalists argue shiprock is the work of the Star People. Could it be they know more about it than our consensus scientists do? We can use this butte and the surrounding landscape to discuss how features were actually formed by lightning in the distant past, when lightning was a thunderbolt of the gods. But first, let's look at some of the absurdities in consensus theory concerning its formation. Shiprock does not sit near a region of true volcanic activity. Northern Arizona has volcanoes along the Mogollon Rim that lie to the south and west of the Four Corners region. This is part of a supervolcanic complex much like Yellowstone. Yet Shiprock itself and a number of similar formations are well removed from those volcanic fields, standing alone on the high desert plains. They are attributed to an ancient volcanic complex called the Navajo Volcanic Field, but are not surrounded by lava flows, ash deposits, or other features provably volcanic in origin. In fact, for these to be considered the throats of ancient volcanoes, the consensus assumes it formed 2,500 to 3,000 feet below Earth's surface and became exposed after millions of years of erosion. In other words, 3,000 feet of vertical surface lands had to be completely eroded away, leaving just the butte poking out of the flat sandstone desert floor. Shiprock is 1,500 feet of broken rock, meaning 1,500 feet of surrounding plateau washed away, in addition to the 3,000 feet of overburden, along with the lava fields, ash deposits, and other traces of volcanic field, without washing away the butte. Let's just say that it's hard to conceive how wind and water could have washed across the land, carrying away trillions of tons of other rock, but left this shard standing. It's not made of kryptonite. It's no harder than the surrounding sandstone. Exposed to millions of years of such abuse, it would have dissolved like a popsicle in an Arizona summer. Nor is there any evidence of how or where this material disappeared to. There's no deposit of silts or remains of past river channels anywhere in the Western Hemisphere to provide evidence of this. How any river or inland sea could have washed the land away without a trace, leaving these volcanic plugs, is a mystery that the consensus can only explain by invoking billions of years. It's the only excuse they know, and they feel it's safe as long as they ignore the electric universe. Shiprock and its neighboring buttes are made of sandstone and a similar material called minette. Minette is chemically the same as the surrounding stone, except it is highly potassic and apparently fused together by heat. The composition of the rock is not hard, highly compressed, or consolidated, such that it could withstand the kind of floodwaters required to wash away the surrounding land. Nor is it like any rock we can witness being produced by volcanoes today. A more plausible and responsible theory is that they were made the way the Navajos say it was made. In Part 2 of Lightning Scarred Earth, we'll look closer at shiprock and other features caused by lightning and their role in mountain building. Thank you.
For continuous updates on Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In the first 5 installments of this series, we outline some of the most compelling evidence that the role of electromagnetism throughout the cosmos is vastly more significant than modern space science has ever entertained. So far, we have explored this question through an examination of the highest energy electromagnetic phenomena at the vastest scales throughout the cosmos. We now move our attention to our own celestial neighborhood and the dynamic interactions between the Sun and all of the bodies which move within its electrical domain. Today, we'll explore why planetary electrical discharges are the 6th of 10 reasons why the universe is electric. Charged planets in the inner solar system. At no time in history have human beings been more dependent on electricity for everyday functioning and survival. On Earth, electricity's significance both for society and in nature seems self-evident. Yet in the space sciences, many strange and outdated notions about Earth's atmospheric and weather phenomena endure, despite an ever-growing wealth of scientific data. It was in the early 20th century that the Norwegian experimentalist Christian Birkeland correctly hypothesized that electric currents from the sun power the Earth's auroras. For many decades, the scientific mainstream largely rejected the thesis, favoring instead the idea that Earth's magnetosphere is an impenetrable envelope, quote, squeezed by the solar wind to induce auroral activity. Only when satellites detected the magnetic signatures of electric currents in the aurora in 1973 was